Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take your essential reading and turn it into the knowledge you need, with surprising facts and, well, hopefully just enough humor to keep you hooked.
Hopefully.
And today we are taking on a really monumental task. We're setting out to examine the very structure of human belief, motivation, and maybe reality itself.
We really are. And we're doing that by jumping straight into some foundational source material that you, the listener, shared with us. The source is from the English BookCast series, and it's excerpts from a deeply influential and complex work.
That would be Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief by Jordan B. Peterson.
That's the one.
So our mission today really is to establish the core concepts, the absolute bedrock of this entire project. And for this deep dive, we're going to focus exclusively on the author's preface and the very first chapter, Maps of Experience, Object and Meaning.
Right. We have to get this foundation right. We need to understand this idea of a duality of reality, the nature of what meaning actually is, and the basic psychological framework that he argues drives all of us.
And what's so fascinating is where he starts. We're not starting with some high-minded philosophy. We're starting with a personal collapse.
That's a total collapse.
Okay, let's unpack this personal history then, because the entire book's intellectual journey seems to begin with this really raw account of the author's youthful political zeal. And its sudden and, from the sounds of it, very painful disintegration.
It's absolutely crucial. It's what grounds the whole theoretical project. Without this story, the rest is just abstract. He describes having this deep, unshakable ideological conviction when he was younger.
Which was?
Basically, that economic injustice was the root of all evil, full stop. And that this problem, this massive, complex problem, was perfectly solvable.
Just solvable through social reorganization.
Exactly. It's a powerful belief structure to live inside, isn't it? It gives you such clarity.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if the problem is external and you can point to it, economic injustice, then the solution feels equally clear. The sources say he was ready to participate in what he called an admirable revolution.
He was driven by this absolute, clear, ideological belief. That's certainty. It provides a beautiful kind of clarity. All doubt just vanishes because your role is so perfectly defined.
But then, looking back on it.
Looking back, he recognized that his actions, his reactions, everything was fundamentally stereotyped. He realized he had done what, millions of people did over the last 2 centuries.
Which is to reject the old ways.
To reject traditional, often theological premises and replace them with these dreams of political utopia. But he argues that those dreams often concealed a very powerful and maybe unacknowledged desire for personal power, for control.
So he sees himself as having been caught in a system of thought that offered answers that were just a little too easy. He calls it an ideological trap.
An ideological trap that had captured millions. And it's so seductive because it offers these simple, elegant solutions to incredibly complex, maybe even insoluble human problems.
And the power of that ideology is in how complete it is. It gives you this total framework for interpreting history, justice, your own moral status even.
It tells you not only what's wrong with the world, but crucially, who is responsible for it.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me, because this whole philosophical structure starts to crack. And not because of some big academic debate.
No.
But because of a book, a confrontation with George Orwell.
Well, the very first seed of doubt was actually planted by a cynical college roommate who just sort of casually questioned whether all of existence could really be squashed into the borders of socialist philosophy.
Just a throwaway comment, maybe?
But it stuck.
Yeah.
The real turning point, though, the thing that broke the dam, was reading Orwell's The Road to Wigan Pier.
And that book was written for the British Lift Book Club, right? So this must have felt like a kind of betrayal, a critique coming from inside the movement itself.
Exactly. That's why it was so powerful. It wasn't an attack from the outside.
So what was the core insight? What was it that Orwell said that just dismantled this whole conviction for him?
Orwell exposed what he saw as the great flaw in socialism, and you could argue in all revolutionary ideology. The critical perception was that many people drawn to the cause, they were very willing to improve things.
Sure, that's the goal.
But they insisted on starting with other people.
Oh,
Yeah.
that shifts the whole target, doesn't it? It implies a kind of psychological projection.
That's it.
If I'm convinced that all the world's problems are because of your structural flaw or his lack of virtue, then I'm completely absolved. I never have to look at my own inadequacy.
That's the crucial insight he took away from it, this idea that anyone willing to change the world by changing other people, They should be treated with profound suspicion.
So the problem wasn't socialism specifically.
The problem wasn't the specific tenets of the ideology. It was ideology itself.
And how does he define ideology as being this psychological hiding place? What is he getting at there?
It provides this incredibly simplistic division of the world. You have those who act appropriately. That's us, the enlightened ones, and those who do not. That's them, the oppressors, the misguided, the enemy.
And by adopting that simple map.
By adopting that map, the believer gets a very convenient refuge. It's a way to avoid confronting your own internal mess, your own undesirable, maybe even inadmissible fantasies and desires.
Because if all my motivation is pure just by virtue of belonging to the right group, I don't ever have to confront the darkness inside myself.
You never have to. It's a perfect shield.
That sounds incredibly comforting.
It is.
But also deeply, deeply dangerous. And if you pull that shield away, the consequences must be immediate. Just chaos.
They were. He describes them as devastating, both practically and philosophically. On the philosophical level, the entire structure of his world just dissolved. He couldn't distinguish between good people and bad people anymore, because the very categories he used had been defined by this flawed framework he'd just rejected. He literally didn't know who to support or who he should be fighting against.
And pragmatically, his career plans.
Gone. The map for his future. He wanted to be a corporate lawyer, maybe aim for politics. It just disintegrated, evaporated. He says he realized the world didn't need another lawyer. And more to the point, he knew he lacked the profound knowledge that would be necessary to even, disguise himself as a leader or a moral authority. The collapse just left him completely directionless, no guide, no defined role.
And it seems like this internal vacuum, this emptiness, opened him up to some terrifying, unfiltered personal experiences. Things that hinted at a much darker reality than politics could ever explain.
This is where the narrative becomes really shocking, and I think absolutely essential for understanding the drive behind the entire book.
He talks about two encounters.
Two shocking encounters that really underscore the proximity of evil. First, he sort of tangentially encounters this man who was seemingly normal, completely irrelevant, just a guy.
Okay.
And he finds out this man had committed something truly horrific. It made these abstract concepts of malice and evil feel terrifyingly real and mundane.
It makes evil proximate, not some far-off idea, but something that could be sitting next to you. But the second experience, that one was much more disturbing because it was internal.
Yes, this recurring disturbing compulsion he felt while he was studying clinical psychology, in a large lecture hall of all places.
An environment of order, of learning.
Exactly. And sitting there, he felt this powerful, almost irresistible impulse to stab the person in front of him with the point of his pen.
It's such a jarring detail because it's such a mundane object, a pen, but the impulse is just pure, unadulterated violence.
And his reaction to this involuntary thought was immediate and profound. He asked himself, what kind of terrible person would have an impulse like that? Not me.
Right, that's not who I am.
But there it was, this internal conflict, the sudden appearance of this previously unthinkable violence. It proved that evil wasn't just out there in the world, encapsulated by your political enemies. It was right there, inside the self.
The ideology had promised him he was on the side of the good?
And his own consciousness just violently contradicted that promise.
Yeah.
It was a direct confrontation with his own shadow.
And this internal collapse, it seems to find its ultimate symbolic expression in this terrifying dream sequence he describes. A complete existential destruction that seems to encapsulate everything he feared about the world dissolving.
The dream is apocalyptic. It provides the psychological urgency for the entire book. He dreams he's sitting in a dark, confined basement in northern Alberta.
And he's with his cousin, Diane.
Whom he describes as the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, which is, symbolic of perfection or purity, perhaps. And they're just watching a distorted television.
So there's this space of false comfort, but then the chaos just invades it.
It crashes right in. His cousin touches the TV cable, and she just convulses, foams at the mouth, shocked by this intense electrical current. It's this intrusion of raw, destructive energy. It signals the breakdown of the boundary between the safe inner world and the destructive outer force.
And he tries to escape. He runs upstairs.
He runs upstairs, trying to get away from the chaos.
But there's no refuge there.
None at all. The ground floor of the house has been surgically removed. Only the floor remains, and it's acting as the basement ceiling. And then he looks outside.
And it's the end of the world.
Total war. Red and orange flames filling the sky. The entire city, the surrounding prairie, everything that has been humanly constructed is utterly destroyed. All that's left are these skeletal black ruins.
It's the ultimate manifestation of the unknown. It's the cataclysm that happens when your internal and external maps fail at the exact same time.
That vision of total collapse, where structure, safety, beauty, it's all just incinerated, that's the psychic motivation for the entire project. The old maps failed him, and he realized that the default state of reality might just be existential ruin.
Which leads us directly into Chapter 1, where he begins this monumental attempt to build a new framework, a new map that can actually withstand that level of internal and external chaos.
Yes, he has to build something that can account for that dream.
So moving into Chapter 1, he immediately presents the core premise of the entire book, which is about how we interpret the world. He says that reality has to be interpreted through two necessary methods, and neither one is complete on its own.
Right.
This feels like a direct attempt to create a philosophical container that can hold both the orderly, predictable world and that apocalyptic dream.
That is precisely the goal. If your psychological and physical world can suddenly just dissolve into flames, then any map of reality that ignores that potential for destruction or ignores the proximity of your own internal evil is inadequate. It's a lie.
So we have to accept this duality of experience.
I have to.
Let's break down these two methods then. The first one he calls the world as a place of things.
This is the realm of objectivity. It's the world of quantifiable data, of consensus reality. It finds its most formal expression in the methods and theories of science.
What does it do?
It seeks to determine increasingly exact, consensually validated properties of things. And that, in turn, lets us use those things efficiently as tools.
Yep.
It answers the question of what is. What is its mass, its color, its temperature?
The objective facts.
The objective facts.
And the second method is much older and seems far more critical to understanding human motivation. It's the world as a forum for action.
This is the mythological interpretation. It's the world that is revealed through stories, through myths, through religious structures. It doesn't tell you the mass of an object.
Yeah.
It tells you the nature of the moral end of existence. It tells you the structure of the cosmos relative to human striving. It answers the question of what matters, and maybe most importantly, how you should behave.
So we can't function just by knowing the objective world. We have to know the world's significance in relation to our goals.
We'd be paralyzed without it. It seems like he's arguing that just because scientific materialism became the dominant way we describe the world, it doesn't mean that the mythological mode stopped being real.
It just means we stopped talking about it seriously. We demoted it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You know, when people say they're searching for meaning, they're searching for the structure of that second world. The two modes, science and meaning, they often disagree, but he says that only means we haven't sufficiently defined the borders between them.
So a complete understanding of any fact, including yourself, requires both the scientific object and the mythological meaning.
You need both lenses to see clearly.
The sources use this fantastic example to illustrate the duality. It's a child encountering a fragile glass sculpture. How does this simple object have a dual nature?
It's a perfect illustration. For the child, everything is experienced as this unified totality. So the child begins the empirical learning process. They're identifying sensory properties.
The scientific part.
The scientific part. What's the color? The brightness? How does it feel? Smooth? Cold? How heavy is it? This is the child gathering objective data.
But at the exact same time, the child learns the object's status, its meaning. And that comes through the intervention of the environment, specifically the mother.
The mother's reaction, her sharp no, or her fearful gasp, that signals danger if the sculpture is approached in the wrong way.
It's an immediate lesson in value.
It's a lesson in value that gets burned right in. The intervention determines the object's socioculturally designated status. The child learns that maintaining the sculpture's current configuration is better, it's more valuable, than pursuing their own exploratory, maybe destructive tendencies.
At least when mom is watching.
Chuckles. At least when mom is watching, yes.
Yeah.
But the point is, the meaning of the object, that don't touch this, it's dangerous and valuable,
Yeah.
it gets immediately integrated into the object itself. It's no longer just cold, smooth glass.
No, it's dangerous, untouchable, magical glass.
That significance, its suggestion for behavior, is assimilated into the object. It becomes part of its magic. For the natural observer, like the child, the meaning is an inextricable part of the thing. It comes from cultural and intrapsychic significance, not just objective sensory qualities.
It's like when a child describes a scary man.
Exactly. The man's scariness is perceived as an objective, inherent quality, just like his height or the color of his shirt. It's not a subjective interpretation to the child. It's a fact of the man's being.
That integration really helps clarify why the pre-Cartesian world was so different. That reality was animated, it was spiritual, it was saturated with moral purpose because meaning hadn't yet been divorced from the object.
Jung, who he cites in the sources, observed this so keenly. The medieval world was beautifully ordered. The earth was fixed at the center of the universe under God's loving care.
Which offered clear moral guidance.
It offered clear moral guidance toward eternal bliss. That framework gave every single action an immediate cosmic significance. What you did mattered not just to you, but to the entire cosmos.
But that beautiful veil, as he calls it, was shattered. Where did the fracture start?
It was shattered by the rise of natural science. Figures like Galileo and Kepler. When their observations, mountains on the moon or planets moving in elliptical orbits, when those things violated the mythical assumption of celestial perfection, the whole framework began to shake.
Because these were phenomena that simply could not exist from the traditional perspective.
They were impossible facts. And the result was this brutal philosophical consequence of man being, of being removed from the cosmic center.
We were no longer the star of the show.
Subtly, no. The objective universe became indifferent to us. First, it was heliocentric, and later it became this infinitely vast, cold, indifferent void. This objective victory left a gaping hole in our map of meaning.
And this brings us directly to Nietzsche's argument about the consequence of abandoning the belief in God. It wasn't just a religious loss, was it? It was a fundamental loss of our moral foundation.
Nietzsche was brutally honest about this. He argued that if you relinquish the Christian belief structure, you also lose the right to Christian morality. You can't have one without the other.
Why not?
Because the entire system is, in his words, consistently thought out and complete. The assumption of that Christian framework is that man cannot know spontaneously what is good and bad. You need divine guidance. You need revelation.
So our modern assumption that we just sort of intuitively know good from evil, justice from injustice, he's saying that's actually a forgotten inheritance. We're operating on the ghost of a morality whose source we've denied.
That is precisely the argument. The deeply ingrained, enduring domain of Christian evaluation continues to guide our ethical thinking, even though we've forgotten its origin. We think morality is self-evident, when in fact it's the consequence of centuries of profound cultural programming.
This really challenges our view of our ancestors, then. We tend to dismiss primitive or mythological thinking as just a failed attempt at science.
It's a huge error, a great error. We can't assume that our ancestors' spirit world was just a primitive conceptualization of our modern matter world.
They weren't trying to do physics and failing.
Not at all. The cosmos that mythology described was real, but it was not the same place known to modern science. He has this great line, "We haven't found God up there because we don't know how to look for up there. It's a dimensional error. We're looking in the world of things for something that exists in the world of meaning."
So pre-experimental thought isn't about physics at all. It's about purpose.
Precisely. Pre-experimental thought is fundamentally a specification of value and a suggestion of behavior. It categorizes the world based on its relation to action, to goals, to survival. It's always asking, is this place safe? Is this food nourishing? Is this person a threat? Thinking, in its most basic ancient sense, is the specification of value relative to survival and striving.
Okay, so if reality is fundamentally structured around action and value, meaning that objects are defined by how we have to interact with them, then we need a clear map for motivation. And Chapter 1 introduces this map through 3 core questions that he says guide all our behavior.
This is the structure of the motivational map. It's the blueprint of human striving. And yes, the 3 questions are always present, whether we're conscious of them or not.
The first is, what is?
Which is really about the nature or significance of your current experience, and is often framed psychologically as the present insufferable. Things aren't right.
The second, what should be?
That's the desirable, valuable end, the future ideal, the place you want to get to.
And third, the practical part. How should we act?
Which is the specific, detailed process you believe is required to transform that present insufferable state into the future ideal. Our entire lives are governed by the tension created by comparing where we are with where we want to be.
Yeah, I want to spend a moment on that future ideal. The source notes that this goal state isn't necessarily grounded in current reality. It's an imaginary vision of perfection. Why is it so essential for the goal to be, well, a little bit fantastical?
Because it has to be compelling enough to mobilize energy and effort. especially when the present is genuinely painful or dangerous. Mythologically, it's the promised land, a spiritual goal, or a political utopia.
It has to be worth the sacrifice.
It has to be worth the sacrifice. It's generated in light of our current knowledge, but it always represents the successful overcoming of our present limitations. An individual is constantly trying to transform their current understanding and location into that hoped-for future state. Without that ideal, the present simply has no meaning. It's just suffering.
So if our identity and our motivation are so tied up in this transformation process, then any interruption, any interference must be deeply, deeply destabilizing.
It is. The entire motivational system is oriented toward maintaining that trajectory toward the ideal. So any interference in the sequence of planned behavior causes immediate anxiety and threat. The system works perfectly fine in explored territory, where things are predictable.
But it panics when the map fails.
It panics.
The sources provide these really vivid examples of goal disruption, starting with the mild form, trivial disruption, or normal novelty.
Right. The example is you're walking down an office corridor while reading something. Your mind is focused on the goal, getting to a meeting, maybe. And you trip over a chair that isn't usually there.
The classic unexpected obstacle.
The interruption is annoying. You experience this brief moment of startled consciousness, but the goal is still attainable. You just sidestep the chair and keep going. Your world model only required a minor, immediate correction.
But the contrast with what he calls catastrophic disruption is profound. The example of desperately waiting for an elevator when you are severely late for a critical appointment. That's the present insufferable written large.
The reaction there is visceral and immediate, because the goal path is blocked, and the ideal getting to the meeting on time, confirming your own competence, is threatened.
And the physical reaction is immediate.
A rising heart rate, sweating hands, and most tellingly, this internal self-reproach. Maybe you're not as smart or as organized as you thought. Your very self-model has taken a hit.
And the environment itself suddenly becomes hostile, doesn't it? The source describes this intense irritation at innocent bystanders, old ladies, kids playing, lovers. They're doing nothing wrong.
Nothing at all.
Yet they are interfering with your essential goal path.
Because your system has prioritized a singular goal above all else. So anyone or anything that consumes resources, takes up time, or just exists contrary to your immediate need for speed, it gets categorized as a threat.
Yeah.
The world has temporarily collapsed into one giant impediment.
And that unexpected surge of energy when you finally give up and rush up the stairs.
That's the emergency mobilization of resources. It's the final, desperate attempt to reestablish the successful trajectory.
And the relief when you finally arrive, conferring that you are not an idiot, that stabilizes the self-model again.
It does. The map is valid again.
So what's the role of punishments and threats in keeping this whole behavioral system regulated?
Punishments are basically just informational signals. They indicate the temporary or final impossibility of achieving a desired means or end. They function by interrupting your action and inducing pain or hurt, which causes the behaviors that led to them to diminish. They undergo extinction.
They reinforce the boundaries of the known world. Don't do that again.
Exactly. Here be dragons.
And are there universal punishments that are recognized across all cultures?
Yes, the system seems designed to avoid a few key things. Physical injury, obviously. Involuntary deprivation of essentials like food, water, or social contact. And maybe most universally relevant to this framework, frustration.
Frustration being the absence of an expected reward.
Or the failure to transform the present into the ideal. The entire structure of our action is built to minimize these informational interruptions, these punishments.
This brings us to probably the most complex concept in this whole structure of action: novelty. When the unexpected appears, he says, it's highly ambivalent.
Absolutely. Novelty, the emergence of the unknown, has this powerful duality. It is experienced at the same time as promise, which leads to hope, and threat, which leads to anxiety.
Both at once.
Because the mere appearance of the unexpected proves that your current guiding story, your map of reality, is incomplete. It's wrong somehow.
So novelty signals this triple error. An error in your description of the present state, the desired future state, or the way you plan to get from one to the other.
Your brain is suddenly caught in this intrapsychic conflict. And that conflict demands a switch in cognitive modes.
From what to what?
When the incomprehensible appears, what's called the orientation reflex replaces all your learned automatic responses. It's that "what was that" moment. This kicks off control processing, which is slow, difficult, effortful, and fundamentally conscious. It's exploratory behavior. It contrasts sharply with the automatic, unconscious processing we rely on when we're in explored habitual territory.
This is where we get into the division of labor in the brain. The sources highlight the specialization of the right hemisphere in processing this initial encounter with novelty.
This is a crucial neurophysiological insight that supports his entire argument about duality. The right hemisphere seems to be specialized in handling less determined, diffuse, global information. It's the part of the brain that places a new stimulus into an initially meaningful context.
Meaning that when the unknown bursts in, the right side of your brain doesn't bother with objective properties. It jumps straight to behavioral consequence.
Exactly. The categorization is based entirely on valency. What does this thing represent for my immediate behavior? The right hemisphere's primary question isn't, what is its chemical composition?
No, it's, can I eat it? Will it eat me? Or can I mate with it?
Oh, shuckles. Basically, yes. Is it dangerous or threatening, or is it satisfying or promising? The categorization is binary at first, threat or promise. And this immediate assessment of value ensures survival before conscious, rational categorization can even begin.
Which shows that meaning, defined by behavioral significance, precedes objective scientific analysis in the face of the unknown.
It has to, for us to have survived.
It's stunning how closely this psychological and neurophysiological structure, built on action and value, mirrors these profound concepts used in mythology across all of time. He argues that reality, when you view it as a form for action, is comprised of three permanent constituent elements.
This is the map of existence itself, the fundamental terrain within which all our striving occurs. The first pillar, the first constituent element, is the eternal unknown, or chaos.
And chaos is metaphorically feminine. It's often symbolized as the Great Mother, or nature itself. Why is this force characterized as both the source and the destination of all things, creative and destructive at the same time?
Because of its profound affective ambivalence. It's the creative matrix. It's the source of all new potential, the place from which new ideas and new structures emerge. That's its positive valency.
But in its negative aspect.
In its negative aspect, it's the terrible mother. It embodies everything unclassified, overwhelming, and destructive. This is where we find aggression, uninhibited sexuality, madness, pestilence, the grotesque figures of our nightmares.
And the paralyzing force that consumes the traveler lost in the forest.
Exactly.
So chaos is the domain where your current map is completely useless, and therefore it contains the potential for total psychological and physical destruction, just like that apocalyptic dream that started this whole thing.
Yes, it is the primordial soup of possibility. But that possibility includes both the ecstatic and the horrifying. It's the overwhelming force of nature, and it's also the internal experience of mental dissolution.
Standing against this eternal chaos is the second pillar, the eternal known, or order.
And order is typically masculine. It's often symbolized as the Great Father or as culture. It is the defined territory, the protective and predictable space that we have already mapped out.
It's the cumulative consequence of all the successful heroic behavior throughout history.
That's a great way to put it. Mythologically, it's the structure. It's the walls surrounding the Hebrew Garden of Eden. It's social norms, the rule of law. It's the known.
And order is obviously necessary for survival. It provides predictability and minimizes conflict. But just like chaos, order has a terrible negative aspect: tyranny.
That is the critical ambivalence of order. The Great Father, in his positive aspect, intercedes against the terrifying world of the Great Mother by providing a structure that restricts the meaning of things, and by doing so, confers predictability onto social interactions. This cultural structure is vital.
But when does it become toxic? When does the Great Father become the tyrant?
When identification with the group with order becomes absolute. When the unknown is forbidden. When the rules become ends in themselves and individual creative exploration is suppressed. When that happens, the probability of social aggression just dramatically increases.
The system turns inward, it becomes rigid, and it starts to crush the individual.
The Great Father becomes a tyrant, enforcing uniformity and demanding psychological sacrifice for the sake of stability.
So we have the overwhelming creative but also destructive potential of chaos. And we have the rigid, necessary, but also tyrannical structure of order. The third element must be the mechanism that mediates between these two poles.
That is the eternal knower, the hero, or in some traditions, the word, the logos. This element isn't a static place or a category like the other two. It's a continuous dynamic process that transforms the unknown into the known and back again when necessary.
So the hero is the living principle that keeps order from becoming tyrannical and keeps chaos from becoming all-consuming.
He is the representation of continuous adaptation. He's the knight who slays the dragon of chaos, replacing confusion with clarity.
He's the sun god, eternally slaying the forces of darkness.
Exactly. Mythologically, he represents the word, the logos, that engenders cosmic creation itself. It's the force that speaks and turns the unformed void into structured meaning.
Let's circle back to the social function of order for a second. Why is group identity so protective against that terrifying Great Mother, against chaos?
Because the collective cultural structure order is our accumulated wisdom about how to survive the unpredictable forces of chaos. By adopting this shared cultural identity, we gain a barrier against overwhelming fear.
The rules, the norms, the shared stories.
They all restrict the overwhelming possibilities of the unknown. They provide just enough predictability to allow us to focus on immediate tasks rather than being paralyzed by existential dread.
It's so tempting to just stay within those walls then. But the hero's function is fundamentally revolutionary. It forces the system to confront what lies outside the walls of order.
The hero is the one who is willing to contact the unknown voluntarily. This figure represents the pattern of behavior that transforms the threatening or unknown into the harmless or the beneficial.
And this act of voluntary exposure facing the dragon in its lair is necessary for all successful adaptation, both for the individual and for the culture.
It has to happen. If the hero stops venturing out, order stagnates, becomes tyrannical, and eventually the accumulated weight of all the unaddressed unknown, the terrible mother, will rise up and consume the rigid, outdated father.
It brings us full circle, right back to the author's initial crisis. He realized his ideology, his form of order, was a trap that stopped him from confronting his own shadow, his own internal chaos.
And the dream showed him the result of that failure: catastrophic collapse.
The hero's task is precisely the opposite: to confront that shadow and to integrate the terrifying unknown voluntarily.
That is the path to meaning.
This has been an incredibly dense foundation we've laid today. We've moved from a deeply personal ideological crisis through the neurophysiology of how you process novelty, all the way to this sweeping mythological structure of reality.
A lot of ground covered.
We established the absolute necessity of interpreting reality through both of these lenses: objective properties and behavioral significance, science and mythology.
And we mapped out the psychological terrain, detailing that constant tension between the present insufferable and the future ideal, which is defined by those three core questions that guide all motivated behavior.
And we concluded by defining these great mythological forces, chaos, order, and the hero or the knower, that he argues structure all of human experience as a form for action.
But we've really only established the map's initial terrain. The stakes for human behavior are now terrifyingly high, framed by this constant pressure of a collapsing ideal.
That's right. So in our next deep dive, we're going to move past this foundational structure and explore the dynamics of revolutionary adaptation itself.
We'll be looking at the psychological process of dissolution and rebirth. We're going to examine the symbolic meaning of some ancient creation myths, like the Babylonian Enuma Elish, and we'll explore the specific psychological consequences of failure and disintegration, the pathways into nihilism and tyranny.
We will leave you with this final provocative thought, drawing directly from the sources we've analyzed today. If the meaning of an object, from a simple chair to the very structure of your society, is defined by its suggestion for behavior relative to a valued end, what does the absence of a clearly articulated, meaningful goal do to your experience of the world? When your target disappears, is the inevitable result the total collapse of meaning, or is it the resurgence of that chaotic, apocalyptic dream?
Something to consider as you move forward.
Continuing the analysis, we will now discuss the fundamental conceptual architecture of human experience, really diving deep into the framework laid out in Maps of Meaning, 3 levels of analysis.
That's right. And this is big stuff. This whole section is about the foundational models, the blueprint, really, for how we interpret reality.
And it's not just about the physical layout of the world, the objective facts. It's about the moral and psychological theater that we all act within.
It's the essential question, isn't it? The chapter really sets the stage by tackling this huge challenge we all face.
Yeah.
How do you make sense of a world that is, on the one hand, completely factual, objective material?
The rules of physics and chemistry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's profoundly subjective.
Yeah.
It's saturated with value, with significance and with moral purpose.
So how do we live in both at the same time?
Well, the sources argue that for us, for the acting conscious individual, reality isn't experienced as one thing, it's experienced dually.
That dual nature is so important because intuitively we don't separate them, do we? For us, especially, when we're young or just operating on instinct, an object isn't just something with empirical properties. It immediately means something. It suggests a behavior or a danger or maybe a promise.
Right, and that distinction between its essence, what it is, and its importance, what it means, it's so fluid. A lot of the time, it's just completely collapsed.
Okay, so let's unpack that unified experience because understanding how we merge fact and value feels like the key to this whole framework.
It absolutely is. The source material uses this incredibly effective analogy, the analogy of a baby and a new object. So imagine a baby finding, say, an expensive glass sculpture for the first time.
Okay, so the baby's in total discovery mode. They're registering the objective, empirical stuff. The glass is cold, it's smooth, maybe it's heavy, it reflects the light.
That's the thingness of it, the raw objective data.
Right.
But then the reality of that sculpture, it just completely transforms the moment the mother intervenes. She rushes over, grabs the baby's hand, maybe says a sharp, disapproving word, no. And at that exact moment, the core knowledge the baby gets is no longer about the object's temperature or its weight.
It's about its status.
Its status, that's the word. It's now a prohibited object. It is dangerous.
But not dangerous because the baby understands the physics of glass breaking, right? It's dangerous because of its cultural meaning.
Yeah.
And its intrapsychic suggestion for how you're supposed to behave around an authority figure.
Precisely. And here's the crucial psychological mechanism that the text really highlights. That acquired meaning, that sociocultural status, it doesn't just float around in the baby's head as an abstract idea.
No, it sticks to the thing itself.
It assimilates directly into the object. The glass sculpture, it gains a new quality, almost like a magical property. It now has the property of prohibited danger. This meaning becomes, as the source says, part of the thing's magic.
So later on, when a child approaches a similar object, that feeling of fear or prohibition is immediate. It feels like it's coming from the object.
It's externally projected, yeah.
They don't think, oh, my mother might punish me if I touch this. They think, this object is scary.
Yes. The subjective moral value has been completely assimilated into the objective world. That's what a unified experience is.
And you're saying that unified experience is basically the default setting for humanity.
For most of our history, absolutely. The mythological worldview, which, dominated human thinking for tens of thousands of years, operates entirely on this principle. Everything you encounter has both a material reality and an immediate, compelling behavioral significance.
Which leads us right into this formal distinction the chapter makes between the two modes of interpretation that have, shaped human history.
Yeah.
The first one, and the one that came along much more recently, is the world of things.
The world of things. This is the domain of the empirical perspective. It finds its modern, formalized expression in science. It's the view that's only concerned with what's consensually validatable, what's measurable.
So you strip away all that subjective value.
You have to. You do it to determine how things work efficiently, how they can be used as tools. It's this highly successful, really magnificent project of Western thought that was formalized roughly post-Descartes, Bacon, and Newton.
And it lets us do incredible things, like build bridges and cure diseases. But it doesn't tell us why we should build a bridge, or if curing a disease is always the right thing to do in every context.
Exactly. It's silent on meaning. And that's where the second interpretation comes in, the forum for action.
This one precedes the objective view.
By a long, long shot. This is the world saturated with meaning and moral purpose. And it's revealed primarily through the collective stories we tell. The myths, the epics, the religious narratives that guide our behavior. These two ways of seeing the cosmos, they have fundamentally opposed goals.
How so, though? I mean, if you look at ancient myths, weren't they trying to explain how the world was made, just, in a pre-scientific way?
And that, right there, is what the sources call the modern error. We assume they were doing primitive science. But the mythological cosmos was fundamentally anthropocentric. Man was at the center of everything. The stories were about the moral dimensions of reality, the meaning of existence, the purpose of suffering, the proper way to act.
Whereas the objective universe,
the one revealed by figures like Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, that universe is heliocentric or, just vast and completely indifferent to us. It's not about us at all.
And that scientific view, as Jung said, it shattered that beautiful veil of meaning.
It did. The moment we realized the universe wasn't built for us, the entire moral structure that got its authority from that central position, it began to crumble.
The shift was just devastating because the value system, the very basis for the forum for action, it was all interwoven with that mythological story.
Precisely. Nietzsche saw this so acutely. He declared that by abandoning the belief in God, we lose the fundamental axiom that our entire Christian morality is built on. You can't just take the moral code and paste it onto an indifferent, objective universe.
Because the code was designed for the subjective, value-filled world.
It was part of the map for that world.
So the modern error is assuming that the mythological world of spirit, the thing that gave us purpose, was just a primitive attempt at describing the world of matter.
We reduce their profound moral narratives to just inadequate physical theories.
That's just wrong.
It's a false reduction, according to this framework. The mythological cosmos was not trying to describe the material facts that modern science knows. It was describing something equally real, but in its own domain.
The domain of subjective experience.
Of value, of motivational significance. Mythology was trying to explain the world as we experience it in its totality, including the universal human experiences of suffering and tragedy and courage and purpose. Science can't touch those subjective realities.
But they are the realities that make us act.
They are. The forum for action is the stage where we live our lives. The world of things is just the material backdrop.
So ancient creation stories weren't failures of cosmology. They were actually huge successes in articulating the phenomenal reality of a conscious person grappling with existence.
They were maps for navigation, not blueprints for construction, a completely different project.
Okay, so if the mythological world is this necessary map for the forum for action, then that map has to be structured by some kind of reliable, eternal landmarks, right?
It does. And the sources define these through three constituent elements. And they all rest on this original, undifferentiated state. Chaos.
Yeah.
It's the amorphous background. It's the terrifying and yet absolutely necessary precondition for existence. It's often visualized as the Ouroboros, the cosmic serpent, eating its own tail.
Because it's completely self-referential. There are no external constraints.
None. It is the creative and the destructive source. It's the beginning and the destination of all determined, categorized things. It represents everything that is uncategorized.
Like an unexpected event, a foreign land.
Or the psychological mystery inside yourself. It's the unknown.
So it sounds like pure untamed potential, but also pure untamed threat.
And that ambivalence is the key. That potential and that threat, they give rise to the first major differentiated element. Number one, the unknown, which is typically personified as the Great Mother, or nature.
The Great Mother.
She embodies chaos, but chaos once it's perceived through the lens of human experience. So she's infinitely promising. She holds the secrets of creation, but she's also eternally terrifying, persuasive, and dangerous.
And this figure it's effectively ambivalent, and it's feminine. The mother who gives birth to us and the devourer who consumes us.
Exactly. And we should probably delve deeper into that duality because it really forms the basis for how we perceive the world that exists outside of our own cultural boundaries.
Okay, so the positive side first.
On the positive side, she is the benevolent mother, the source of perpetual sustenance, of redemption, of life itself. She represents the infinite resourcefulness of nature, the possibility of the next great discovery, the nurturing aspect that makes all growth possible.
She's the field that provides the harvest.
She is. But the sources spend a lot of time on her destructive counterpart, the terrible mother. And this is a really powerful psychological and mythological force.
So what does that embody?
The terrible mother is the embodiment of raw, uninhibited negativity. She represents aggression without fear or guilt, the chaotic force of nature unleashed. Psychologically, she's linked to the Freudian id, right? The impulsive, unrestrained biological drives.
So this destructive side includes things like, what? Sexual promiscuity without responsibility?
Yes, and dominance without compassion, greed without empathy. Think of all the mythological images. The witch, the succubus, the plague, pestilence, that paralyzing despair, even natural disasters that just wipe out civilization.
She is everything that exists to devour the established order.
And to remind us that life is inextricably, unavoidably linked to death and consumption.
So if the ultimate goal of any acting person is survival and adaptation, then the necessary first step has to be constraining the manifestations of the terrible mother while trying to maximize the promise of the benevolent mother.
You have to.
And that constraint, that requires the second element. Number two, the known, also called the Great Father or culture.
Order. This is the defined territory, the predictable civilization that we erect against the vastness of chaos in nature. It's typically masculine because it represents the cumulative structure of social organization and exploratory achievement over generations. The Great Father is tradition, structure,
The Walls of Eden.
the walls of Eden, exactly. In its benevolent aspect, the Great Father provides absolute security, predictability, safety. Psychologically, he represents the superego, the internalized rules that keep the group functioning.
But, and this seems to be a theme, there's another paradox here. Order, when you take it too far, becomes tyrannical.
It does. The Great Father is simultaneously restrictive, demanding, and often oppressive. The tyranny of a rigid patriarchal society or a stifling bureaucracy is this compulsion towards absolute static control.
And the sources are very clear on this point. When your identification with the group, with the culture, becomes absolute, when the culture believes it has fully mapped reality and therefore refuses to permit the unknown to even exist.
Then the probability of social aggression just dramatically increases.
That's a fascinating insight. Why? Why does absolute order lead to more aggression?
Well, because refusing to acknowledge the unknown means you're stifling the necessary process of exploration and adaptation. If the existing order, the Father, can't handle novelty, it has to ruthlessly suppress it.
And it turns its aggression inward, against its own exploratory members, or outward against anyone who's different.
Exactly. The myth of the king who maintains this perfect static control, he always risks becoming a sick tyrant. And his death symbolizes the necessary dissolution of that stagnant order. It forces a return to chaos before any renewal can happen.
Okay, so we have the terrifying potential of chaos, the mother, and we have the stabilizing but potentially tyrannical structure of order, the father. The third element has to be what mediates between them.
It has to be. And that's number 3, the knower. Also known as the divine son, the hero, or simply the process. This is the exploratory capacity itself.
So it's the entity that willingly steps outside the walls of the known.
Yes, and ventures into the territory of the unknown precisely to transform that threat into a resource.
The hero is the knight who slays the dragon. And the dragon is. It's a concentration of chaos, and it's guarding some kind of material wealth. The hero replaces disorder with certainty.
Or more universally, the hero is the word, the logos, that engenders creation. This links directly to really ancient concepts, like the Egyptian idea of Maat, which represents truth and order and cosmic balance. The hero of the logos brings Maat out of the primeval waters of chaos.
So this isn't just a mythological story. It's a constant, necessary cognitive process that we're all engaged in.
All the time. The hero's core function is to voluntarily engage with the anomaly, with the unexpected, and to transform something that was previously threatening into something harmless or even beneficial.
And this process is what keeps a culture from stagnating and falling into tyranny.
That's the idea. The mythological structure suggests that a healthy, what they call a metastable society, requires that its fixed values, the father, always remains subject to the pattern represented by the hero.
The willingness to adapt and change.
Yes. The successful hero returns with new knowledge, which is then integrated into the cultural structure. And that prevents the known from becoming absolutely stagnant and brittle.
Okay, so if those mythological archetypes define the playing field, how do we use them to actually structure our day-to-day actions? How do we move from these eternal forces to the psychology of motivation?
Right. So the source material argues that all complex human behavior is fundamentally goal-oriented. It's structured by a constant comparison between our perceived present state and an imagined ideal future state.
So we are always acting to resolve the unsatisfactory present condition, what the text calls the what is, and turn it into the desired future condition, the what should be.
And this ideal, this what should be, is incredibly potent. It's conceptualized as a vision of perfection. And that can be a small, achievable goal for the afternoon, or it could be a grand guiding vision.
A promised land, a spiritual domain, a political utopia.
All of it. We are constantly modeling and then trying to optimize our current path toward this ideal.
So when we're planning any action, whether we're conscious of it or not, our system is trying to answer 3 core questions at the same time.
3 questions, yeah.
First, what is? Which is the nature, the meaning, the significance of my current experience, the present unsatisfactory. Second, what should be? The desirable end state, the future ideal.
And third.
Therefore, how should I act? What are the specific steps I need to take to transform this present into that desired future?
Right. And our actions are designed to produce that ideal state, which means we have to create these complex hierarchies of value. We can't act randomly. We have to constantly evaluate the importance of everything happening around us.
And this really highlights the relational nature of value, doesn't it? A thing's importance isn't fixed. It's conditioned entirely by our current preferences and the goal we're chasing.
Absolutely. Think about the classic example.
Hmm,
Food. Food is generally considered good, right?
sure.
But if you've just eaten a massive meal, your motivation to work for more food drops to zero.
Hmm.
But if you're starving, the value you assign to working for food approaches infinity.
The object hasn't changed its physical properties. It's still food. But its subjective meaning, its valuation within your hierarchy of goals, has completely flipped.
Flipped completely based on your present state relative to your ideal future state,
Uh-huh.
which in that case is survival.
And we're constantly doing this. We internalize and assess our position within these hierarchies, socially, professionally, personally. We model our current standing.
Who we are, how important our experiences are, who we should listen to.
And we compare that against the ideal of becoming more respected or powerful or less anxious or more competent. It's a perpetual active pursuit.
And luckily, we have an internal compass to guide this whole process.
Yep.
Our emotional signaling system. This is the crucial feedback loop that tells us if we're moving closer to the ideal or falling away from it.
How does that feedback loop break down? What are the signals?
Well, we can classify them into two primary types: when a means produces the desired end, or when we're making tangible progress along the path. We experience satisfaction or hope.
And that reinforces the behavior. It tells our system, keep doing that. That's working.
Exactly. But conversely, if the path is blocked, or if we fail,
Then we get punishment, threat, or pain.
right, and that signals the temporary or final impossibility of achieving a desired means or end. Punishments in this context are these involuntary states of deprivation, disappointments, frustrations.
So when you hit that emotional block, whether it's actual physical pain or just profound disappointment, it forces you to stop what you're doing.
Immediately, it demands a choice.
Yeah.
Find an alternative path or completely abandon the goal. The pain is a necessity for reorientation.
So our emotions aren't random at all. They're these sophisticated signals that tell us the distance and the direction between our unsatisfactory present and our ideal future.
That's the model.
But what happens when this perfectly modeled system, this behavioral path from present to ideal, suddenly runs into something it didn't expect? That's where novelty comes in.
Right. And novelty is any unexpected event. And it is intrinsically ambivalent. It carries both promise, the potential for new resources, which leads to hope and curiosity and threat, the potential for danger, which leads to anxiety and fear.
Most of the time, we deal with what the text calls normal novelty, right? Trivial adaptation.
We do. Let's expand on that scenario of walking down a familiar corridor while you're reading, totally immersed in your routine, and you trip over a chair that wasn't there before.
Okay, so the chair is an unexpected obstacle. It momentarily breaks your automatic flow.
You stumble, but you immediately make a minor adjustment. You step around it, maybe you feel a flash of irritation, but your goal getting to the office is still achievable within the time frame you set.
My core map of the building and my overall purpose for the day, it all remains intact.
Exactly. That minor disruption, it triggers the orientation reflex.
We snap out of that automatic habitual processing. We stop the flow of pre-programmed actions.
Yes. The emergence of the unexpected is what critically involves consciousness. It replaces those routine responses with what's called controlled processing. Consciousness seems to be uniquely involved in evaluating novelty, assessing its threat level, and helping to integrate the unpredictable thing into a defined, predictable context.
It's our capacity to generate a new, understandable world from a sudden influx of the unexpected.
Mediated by that balance of fear and hope.
But sometimes the anomaly is catastrophic. It's not a chair you trip over, it's the floor opening up beneath you. This is revolutionary novelty.
And this is when the anomaly cannot be integrated into your current understanding. It causes a complete rupture and reformulation of the entire cognitive map, both the what is and the what should be. The whole framework just collapses.
The source material gives this really compelling narrative of how this kind of collapse can spiral, starting with something small.
Yeah, the example of the person who's desperately waiting for an elevator that's late.
It's just a small delay, but it means their planned future is now impossible. The system generates anxiety, and instead of rationally adjusting, the frustration mounts, and they start questioning their fundamental competence.
I can't even predict the time it takes to get to work. Maybe my entire career is built on a lie.
The cognitive map starts to fray, and the internal state, the present, becomes unbearable.
Now, imagine the truly existential crisis. The person whose entire comfortable life, their marriage, their job, their social standing, suddenly vanishes because of a betrayal or an economic collapse.
The predictable, rewarding present is just gone.
They're hit by immobility, intense fear, aggression, and sometimes the contemplation of suicide. The future, which was once a defined path to an ideal, it just opens up like a metaphorical pit.
And the person falls directly into chaos, into the unknown.
Right. And the figures in the text describe this as revolutionary adaptation. It's a descent or a disintegration from the functional model back into that chaotic state, but it's followed by an ascent of reintegration.
Which suggests that this psychological dissolution, this falling apart, isn't a failure. It's a necessary precondition for creative restructuring.
It is the ultimate return to the pre-cosmogonic chaos, the domain of the terrible mother. The personality is momentarily disintegrated, and you're subjected to these involuntary, archaic emotional mechanisms. But because chaos is simultaneously threatening and infinitely promising,
This is the moment where the heroic process has to emerge.
it has to. The individual must, using the light of their own consciousness, conquer that chaos and reconstruct a new functional map of meaning. A new what is and a new what should be.
And only then can the personality successfully reintegrate.
Right. It reminds you that every profound crisis is, archetypally speaking, the creation of a new world.
So, if the hero is constantly reconstructing this map, how is the knowledge that guides this reconstruction, our fundamental moral and behavioral wisdom, how is that stored and transmitted across a culture?
This is such a critical part of the framework for understanding cultural stability. It suggests this deep hierarchy of knowledge that exists across three distinct tiers of increasing explicitness.
Okay, so at the very foundation, we have the most fundamental layer.
That's one. Processual knowledge, or know-how, this is implicit, it's non-representational behavioral patterns, it's motor, it's instinctual, and it's learned through direct imitation. It's the knowledge that's literally encoded in your nerves and muscles.
It's like riding a bike, or the immediate visceral trust you place in a social routine, or maybe even the instinctual way you respond to a raised voice.
All of those. You know how to act, but you can't articulate the rules governing your actions. The text points out that even simple social animals, they establish dominance hierarchies, and they behave as if they're following certain principles, but they don't have the capacity to represent those rules abstractly. This deep layer of behavioral procedure is the source of our fundamental stability.
Then moving up from there, we get to 2, episodic knowledge, the know-what-image level.
This is the narrative, the dramatic, the imagistic representation of behavior and its consequences. This is the domain of stories, myths, drama, religious rituals, parables.
This metaphorical layer, the mythos of the culture, this is where the behavioral wisdom from that processual level gets encoded and shared in a memorable, compelling way.
Exactly. Think of classic morality tales, like the story of the prodigal son or the archetype of the hero's quest. They distill millennia of successful behavioral patterns into a potent emotional image.
And then finally, at the top, we have the most explicit abstract layer. 3, semantic knowledge, or know-what rules.
This is where we formalize everything. Explicit verbal formulations like laws, moral philosophy, religious doctrine, written codes of conduct. This is the layer that our rational thought operates on. And crucially, it's the layer that's most susceptible to rational critique.
So wisdom develops upward then. The moral philosophy, the semantic level, it arises from the profound stories of the culture, the episodic level.
Which themselves are refined models of ingrained procedure, the processual level.
And this is where human innovation really explodes, isn't it? Abstract thought lets us experiment with these semantic rules. We can debate them, rewrite laws, play what-if scenarios.
Without having to suffer the real-world consequences of those untested behaviors.
Yes.
Game playing, for instance, allows us to practice social coordination and adherence to abstract rules at the processual level, which then feeds our episodic and semantic understanding of concepts like fairness.
But the real danger here lies in the inverse relationship, what the sources call the cascade effect.
Yes. Because these levels are so deeply interlinked, abstract critique can be incredibly destabilizing.
Yes.
A threat to the validity of any assumption at one level threatens all the others simultaneously. So abstract criticism, especially when it's done casually or carelessly at the semantic level, say, a radical critique of a core moral tradition, can profoundly weaken the underlying imagistic, episodic, and behavioral processual structure of a person's personality.
So we think we're just changing a law, but we might actually be undermining the very foundation of our ability to act coherently in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When the semantic structure collapses, the episodic stability, the guiding stories we live by, loses its footing. And that results in profound emotional instability and vulnerability. When a person loses faith in their core stories, they become highly susceptible to simplistic, totalizing ideologies that offer this false, rigid certainty.
They're desperately trying to rebuild the cognitive map overnight.
Yes. And this whole mechanism is powerfully illustrated by that psychological study that cited the experiment with the anomalous playing cards.
Right, the Black Four of Hearts.
That experiment is just crucial for understanding how our fundamental expectations resist change. When subjects were first shown the Black Four of Hearts, their ingrained processual expectation was hearts are red, and fours are either black or red.
So their brains immediately, unconsciously just categorize the anomaly as something they already knew.
Right. They saw it as either a black four of spades, fitting the color and number, or a misprinted red four of hearts, fitting the suit and number. They crammed the anomaly into their existing known system without any conscious awareness of doing so.
They were protecting the map from the threat of the unexpected.
They were. But as the anomaly was presented to them again and again, the cognitive dissonance mounted. The system struggled. The subjects became hesitant, distressed, confused.
And while some of them eventually made the leap, they reformulated their categories to correctly identify the anomalous card.
Others failed completely. They experienced acute personal suffering. They were unable to integrate the anomaly, exclaiming that the object didn't even look like a card to them anymore.
That is the perfect model for revolutionary novelty, the collapse of the map. When our fundamental processual expectations about reality are confronted with an anomaly they cannot integrate, the explicit rational critique at the semantic level becomes impossible.
And the resulting suffering is despair, chaos, and the disintegration of the personality.
Wow. It just underscores why our capacity for abstraction is such a double-edged sword.
It is. It grants us immense power for communication and for advancement, but it also provides us with the intellectual tools to weaken the very traditions and embedded procedures that lend predictability and emotional stability to our lives. When we challenge the rules, we have to be so careful not to trigger a cascade that collapses our own capacity to stand upright.
So to wrap this up, this deep dive into the conceptual foundations of our experience has really established the essential components of our reality map. We have this permanent battlefield, defined by the known, which is order or the father, facing the unknown, which is chaos or the mother.
And it's all mediated by the knower, the hero, the logos, through constant goal-directed action.
And we've seen that human stability depends entirely on successfully managing the transition between these two domains. We're constantly updating our behavioral maps through those three tiers of knowledge, processual, episodic, and semantic.
And understanding these constituent elements and their interplay, how order can become tyrannical, how the unknown is both terrifying and infinitely promising, and how the hero transforms the world, this is not merely academic.
No, it's crucial. It's crucial for understanding personal adaptation and cultural stability. Our subjective reality is an active phenomenon that demands this constant, careful reconciliation of empirical fact and assigned value. We're always seeking that ideal future, and our emotional life is the signal telling us whether we're on the right path or totally lost in the weeds.
Right? I think the complexity of these models really drives home a profound implication. The behavioral and moral rules we follow, even the ones that seem arbitrary or irrational when you only look at them at the abstract semantic level, they exist for deeply embedded processual reasons.
Our stability depends on these deeply encoded patterns, the wisdom of the mythos. Yet, our progress demands that heroic spirit, the willingness to challenge those patterns.
That's the tension.
So, the final provocative thought for you to carry forward is this. Our truest, most enduring stability does not come from a static, rigid adherence to the known, to the established traditions of the tyrannical father. Instead, lasting stability is found in the constant, courageous humility to admit when our map is wrong, to endure the suffering of its collapse, and to perpetually reorganize our very being in the face of anomaly, thus continuously renewing our essential map of meaning.
A complex and essential consideration. The analysis will continue next.
Continuing the analysis, we will now discuss how individuals transition from what can be a really chaotic, subjective experience to internalizing a coherent model of the world, a map of meaning that is adopted and, shared by their entire culture.
That's precisely it. That's our starting point. This segment is really a deep psychological and sociological exploration of acculturation. It's the machinery that allows us to construct a reality we can predict.
And the core concept here is this map of meaning.
Yes. And it's so important to get this right. It's not just some abstract intellectual roadmap you'd find in a book.
Yeah.
It's more like a live operating system. It's made up of all our assumptions, our expectations, and this is the most crucial part, our shared behavioral patterns.
So this structure, this map, is fundamentally moral and behavioral. It's telling us how we ought to act, rather than just being a collection of, say, neutral facts about the universe.
Absolutely. The function of this map is primarily regulatory. It dictates what competence is and what has value, defines success and failure, but all within that specific social context.
So it's practical knowledge.
It's operational knowledge. It's knowing how.
Yeah.
And it's this knowing how that, in a very real sense, shields us. So our mission in this deep dive is to really understand the mechanics of this transformation, how through adopting a group identity and internalizing its foundational mythical narratives, we turn the inherently vast and frankly terrifying unknown into the manageable known.
And that adoption is our psychological antidote against fear.
It's a fundamental antidote, yes.
Okay, let's unpack the foundational mechanism then. How do we even start building this map right from our most basic experience? The source materials argue that everything an individual encounters has this dual nature, yet we experience it as a unified whole. What makes up that dual nature?
Well, think about any object you might encounter, anything at all. It possesses undeniably what we could call empirical
It's
properties.
scientific stuff.
Exactly. The qualities that science tries to isolate. Its color, its texture, its temperature, its weight. These things exist, in theory, separate from any human intent. But at the same time, and for a living, acting human being, this is far more important, the object carries a sociocultural status or meaning.
The meaning. In other words, the object offers a very concrete suggestion for behavior.
Precisely. That suggestion for behavior is the aspect that governs our immediate interaction, our survival even. When you see a chair, you aren't just processing, complex arrays of light and wood density. That's the empirical side. You see something that must be sat upon.
Or maybe something that must not be stood upon if you're in a crowded theater.
Right. That's the sociocultural meaning. In our primary experience, the distinction between the object's objective essence and its motivational significance it's blurred. Or maybe it's completely absent.
And that unified experience is so important because it roots value and meaning directly into the fabric of reality. It makes them feel just as tangible as color or temperature. This is perfectly captured by that parable of the glass sculpture.
It's the ultimate illustration of how significance just assimilates into an object. So imagine a small child, an infant, who's just engaging in basic exploration. They're reaching out, maybe batting at the surface of an expensive, very fragile glass sculpture that's been placed on a high counter.
Okay.
So the child registers the sensory input. It's smooth, it's cold, it's glittering. These are the empirical qualities.
But then the parent intervenes, maybe sharply, grabbing the child's hand. Perhaps there's an angry tone, a loud, "No, never touch that."
And in that instant, the child learns something far more profound than the object's visual properties. They learn its significance. The sculpture is dangerous, it's forbidden, it must be avoided, at least in this current setup, and certainly when the parent is watching.
So the child has simultaneously encountered the object empirically and its culturally determined significance all in one go.
In one unified flash. And this is where, as the source describes it, the magic happens. The fear, the prohibition, the culturally mandated meaning, it isn't just associated with the object. For the child, it becomes an inseparable part of the object itself.
It's not a logical step-by-step process.
No, it assimilates naturally. For the developing human, it's not an intellectual exercise where they think, this object is intrinsically cold and it also causes fear in my mother. No. The object is cold and frightening. Its sociocultural meaning, its value for action, is experienced as an inherent, intrinsic property.
Which explains why people, really struggle to separate a perceived threat from the actual objective reality of that threat.
Absolutely. The perceived danger of that forbidden thing is felt as if it's part of the external world. It's in the object.
That distinction, or the lack of distinction between empirical fact and moral value, that takes us straight into the difference between the mythological way of seeing the world and our modern, post-Cartesian scientific view.
Exactly. We have this tendency now to view the mythological worldview as just a primitive, failed attempt at science. And that is a fundamental error.
It's like we're judging it by the wrong criteria.
Completely. Before the Enlightenment, before the age of pure materialism, humanity lived in a world that was, as the source puts it, animated, spiritual, saturated with meaning, imbued with moral finality. The world they described in their myths was not the same world of matter that we analyze today.
And our modern tendency is to just discard that mythological perspective because we prioritize empirical observation above all else. But you're arguing their interpretation was actually more fundamental to human thought and survival.
It was. The central argument here is that thinking, at its absolute core, is specification of value, specification of behavioral suggestion. Categorization itself, the fundamental act of deciding what constitutes a thing, is actually the grouping of items according to the behavior they suggest.
So when we decide something is a chair or a tool or a danger, we aren't primarily cataloging its molecular structure. We're grouping it by its functional significance, by how it demands we interact with it.
The chair is a category because it suggests sitting. It's not a category because it has 4 legs. I mean, we could easily imagine a chair with 3 legs, or even no legs, like a hammock.
Right.
Therefore, when these pre-experimental cultures create their cosmologies, they aren't mapping spatial relationships. They're defining the world in terms of action, value, and moral purpose.
This really challenges our modern assumption that the real world is the material world. The mythological world, while maybe not scientifically accurate, was profoundly real in terms of moral and behavioral consequence.
The mythological cosmos is a forum for action. It's fundamentally concerned with reality in its totality, and that includes its value, its significance. It deals with what we should do.
And science doesn't.
The ultimate difference is that modern science learned to successfully forget what was important. That is, it successfully bracketed out moral and motivational significance in order to isolate the material variables. The mythological mind never made that concession. It maintained a map of meaning created by the necessity to act, not the necessity to catalog things abstractly.
Utility comes before abstraction. So this map of behavioral morality, created through countless tiny interactions like the one with the glass sculpture, it then has to be transmitted to sustain the culture. That brings us to our next section. How does this individual value-laden meaning become a shared map, and how is it passed down?
Well, the transmission of knowledge begins with the most basic mechanism imaginable: pure imitation, the mimetic propensity.
Imitation is the ultimate adaptive shortcut.
It truly is. I mean, imitation is simply the capacity to observe that another person achieved some kind of valued goal and then to duplicate the observed procedures that led to that accomplishment. It doesn't require a complex pre-wired instinct or anything like that. It just requires the motivation to get the same thing.
This just dramatically expands cultural competence. You don't have to risk your own life figuring out which berries are poisonous or how to hunt a dangerous animal. You just watch someone else succeed and copy them.
Precisely. The source notes that imitation enables the ability of each to become the capacity of all.
Yeah.
If one person discovers a better way to build a shelter or forge a tool, that competence can be replicated incredibly rapidly across the entire community. It's a massive evolutionary advantage.
But pure, exact imitation has a critical drawback, right? It's brittle.
It's entirely context-dependent. Specific behaviors are only useful in very restrictive environments. The exact sequence of movements you use for fishing in a calm river is completely useless if the environmental conditions change, if the river freezes over, or if the fish you're hunting migrates.
So the utility of the copied strategy can be reversed if the situation isn't perfectly replicated.
It becomes a liability. So for knowledge to become durable and adaptable, for it to be generalizable, it needs to be abstracted away from the exact physical context. And this is where play and dramatic action enter the picture.
Okay, so play is more than just practice.
Much more. The necessary abstraction of imitation occurs through dramatic play or pretense. Play isn't just a distraction or simple rehearsal. It's a mechanism for the permanent extension of behavioral competence and confidence, and it does this through metaphorical and symbolic action.
It creates a kind of rule-governed fantasy world, a simulation.
And that allows behavior to be rehearsed and mastered in a safe, low-stakes environment, the world of fantasy, before that behavior is expressed in the high-stakes real world, where the consequences are immediate and can be severe. This is how that procedural knowledge, the knowing how, begins to generalize.
This establishes a kind of hierarchy of how knowledge is codified. It moves from the processual to the abstract. This concept is really key, but I feel like it's often glossed over. Let's spend a moment and define these stages clearly.
Yeah, let's. Think of it like a ladder. At the very bottom, at the base, you have processual knowledge. This is the unconscious, automated routines that govern action. You know how to ride a bike, but you probably can't fully explain the physics of balance while you're doing it.
It's muscle memory.
It's deeper than that, but yes, it's generated by exploration, and it's transmitted by basic imitation. The next rung up on the ladder is episodic memory, and this is where play and drama operate.
Okay.
For that processual knowledge to become consciously accessible and generalizable, it has to first be represented in episodic memory. It has to be put into the form of a drama or a narrative. The story of riding a bike, the narrative of the first time you fell and the subsequent success, allows you to talk about the skill metaphorically. It's stored as a sequence of events, a story.
And only after that episodic representation, that story, can we finally arrive at semantic abstraction.
Only then. Only then can it be made accessible to conscious verbal formulation. This is the moment we start developing a theory, a set of explicit rules or morality that we can actually articulate. And the crucial insight here really is that behavior precedes theory. Our morality and our social behaviors dramatically precede any abstract representation or rational description of their underlying basis.
That completely flips the common assumption that, some philosopher invents a moral system and then people decide to follow it. Instead, the culture acts according to what works for survival, and then much later, the thinkers come along and try to articulate why it worked.
The mythos of a culture contains all of this deep, codified wisdom. The explicit philosophy, the moral codes we write down, it emerges from that mythos, and it becomes progressively more abstract and episodic over generations.
So the stories, the narratives, are the culture's storage mechanism for knowing how.
That's the perfect way to put it. They contain detailed portrayals of the outcomes of the procedural system, and they have all these implicit inferences about the motivational and emotional factors that govern our behavior.
So when we read ancient myths, even if they seem scientifically ridiculous to us now, what we're actually accessing is a socio-historically built, incredibly complex instruction set on how to act successfully in a given environment. The wisdom is effective, even if the description is fantastical.
It is the declarative memory system, the system that knows what, attempting to describe and make portable the vast, unconscious processual memory system, the system that knows how. And it does this through powerful, emotionally resonant stories.
That brings us right to Section 3, then. This focuses on how this cultural wisdom crystallizes into the very structure of order itself, which is often symbolized as the Great Father. You argued that group identity is the primary vehicle for adopting this complex map of meaning.
Yes, the successful psychological transition into adulthood really involves replacing that immediate parental dependence with an identification with the group. This is the act of acculturation. The group offers this vast, historically validated, and highly sophisticated pattern of adaptation.
It provides a non-parental, generalized source of protection from the unknown.
Precisely. This group identity, which is fundamentally a story about how things are and how they should be, constructs a very robust barrier against the truly unexpected. It protects individuals from what the source calls the overwhelming dread of their own experience.
So without that societal structure, we'd just be paralyzed.
Or could be paralyzed or just flooded with fear. The constant presence of anomaly of the unknown would be too much.
And this societal structure, this codified, stable tradition, is often mythically represented as the Great Father.
The eternal known, which is culture, defined territory, shared rules, is typically conceived of as masculine, the Great Father. He embodies order, predictability, discipline, and restriction. And importantly, the Great Father is the historical structure that humanity has painstakingly constructed between the individual and the terrible unknown.
Which is the Great Mother, or chaos.
Exactly. The Great Mother, nature, chaos. She is simultaneously the source of all potential and all destruction. The Great Father culture is the rigid boundary that's been erected against that bivalent chaos.
You see this in so many ancient cosmogonies.
Oh, everywhere. The Mesopotamian creation myth, the Enuma Eliah, is a classic example. You have Tiamat, the female dragon of the salty abyss, representing primordial, unregulated chaos. And the Great Father figure, Marduk, slays her and carves the world and the heavens out of her body, establishing defined territory, predictable laws, and human civilization.
So the father is order placed against the deep, amniotic unpredictability of the mother.
And the moment that order breaks down is catastrophic.
Okay.
This is illustrated so dramatically in that anecdote about the tailor.
Right, the death of the king.
Yes, the death of the king, the figure who embodies order and predictability, is symbolic of the potential dissolution of all security. The anecdote describes the king growing so great that he dies and goes to heaven, and in doing so, he makes a huge hole in the sky. And rain starts falling uncontrollably, threatening a flood.
The death of the symbolic head of the cultural order causes the walls to break, and the unknown, the primordial waters of chaos, threatens to flood the entire realm.
The consequence of structural collapse is the return to the terrifying. The protective wall just dissolves, and the people risk being completely overwhelmed. But we can't overlook the ambivalence that's inherent in this Great Father structure, as the source materials illustrate so well.
Right, because order, while it's necessary for stability, is simultaneously safety and tyranny.
That's the paradox. The Great Father, the rigid tradition, is demanding, it's unfair, it's restrictive, and it can be dangerous. Yet it is also absolutely necessary for cohesion and competence. Tyranny is the shadow side of security. The system provides structure, but often at the cost of individual freedom and exploratory innovation.
And the real problem arises when the identification with this group, with this father figure, becomes absolute, when it becomes dogmatic.
That's the danger zone. When the system becomes terrified of the unknown, when any anomaly is forbidden and everything must be controlled, the exploratory creative process is just suffocated. And this ideological rigidity dramatically increases the probability of social aggression. The group turns inward on itself, seeing any deviation or change as an existential threat that must be purged, often violently, to maintain the structure.
This tension, the need for order versus the danger of rigid control, this leads us straight into Section 4. How a clear moral path can so quickly transform into the trap of ideology.
The shared map, the moral path. It's constructed based on a fundamental goal-oriented cognitive schema. It has to answer three inescapable questions. And these questions, they define the hierarchy of value for the whole group.
Okay, the first question, what is? This defines the nature of the current state of experience, which is usually perceived as an unbearable or imperfect present. It's the starting point.
The second question, what should be? This is the desirable end state, the ideal future, the vision of perfection, the promised land, utopia. This sets the target for all effort.
And then the third question, which is derived from the contrast between the first two. Therefore, how should we act? This defines the specific processes, the steps required to transform the imperfect present into the desired ideal future.
And the very postulation of this path, this vision of perfection, it creates an inevitable hierarchy of value, a dominance hierarchy. An individual's position within this hierarchy reflects the social judgment of their competence, their capacity to contribute to realizing the group's objective.
So the social structure, then, isn't just arbitrary. It reflects the moral map that the society has adopted to achieve its articulated goal. But ideology steps in and offers a dangerous shortcut to this complex moral structure.
Ideology is a simplistic collapse of this highly complex moral hierarchy. And the source details the author's really vivid personal realization of his own attraction to socialism. And it wasn't because of purely intellectual curiosity, but because of the underlying psychological mechanism.
Right, and we should probably spend some time detailing this personal account because it really captures the essence of the temptation.
Absolutely. The author describes how, when he found himself unable to rationally accept the premises of religion, the traditional source of the map, he resorted to dreams of political utopia and personal power. The lure was the absolute certainty that all evil stemmed from a single identifiable source, economic injustice, and could be remedied by a simple rearrangement of social organizations.
The ideological map is so appealing because it offers certainty in a complex world, and it provides a clear enemy and a clear method. You know who to blame and what to do.
And the fatal temptation here is the desire to improve things by beginning with other people. The source issues a very strong warning. Anyone who is willing to change the world by transforming others should be regarded with suspicion. The flaw isn't exclusive to any single political system, but to the nature of ideology itself, which simplifies the terrifying moral complexity of existence into a binary of the righteous and the damned, the adequate and the inadequate.
And this simplification allows the believer to hide from their own deeply complex and often, unpleasant and inadmissible fantasies and desires. The ideological stance is ultimately a masterful evasion of complex personal responsibility.
It creates a moral certainty that active real-world morality can never provide. By adopting the ideology, the individual can disguise their own internal failures and self-serving desires as high-minded social goals. The author realized his own attraction was a disingenuous attempt to gain leadership and power, believing he knew enough to fix the world, which he rightly saw as a disintegration of his own life plan.
And we see the absolute antithesis of this rigid ideological obedience in Dostoevsky's metaphorical figure of the mouse in Notes from Underground. It's the crippling contrast of excessive consciousness.
The underground man, or the mouse, is tormented by hyperconsciousness.
Yeah.
He's so aware of the complexity, the moral ambiguity, the infinite layers of justification and rationalization that he denies justice in any action whatsoever.
He creates for himself a fatal swamp, a stinking bog of doubts and psychological agitation. He's completely paralyzed.
The mouse cannot act. He can't even seek petty revenge because he recognizes that any step he takes is morally questionable, possibly self-serving, and ultimately arbitrary in the grand scheme of things. He's forced to just retreat, ashamed, back into his hole because he has negated the possibility of a moral map entirely.
So the ideologue says, I possess this certain map. Follow me. And the mouse says, no map exists, and any attempt to follow one is morally bankrupt. Both of these are paths to pathology, one through rigidity and aggression, the other through paralysis and despair.
The mouse shows the fate of those who can no longer rely on any map of meaning, not even an ideological one, which brings us directly to our final section. What happens when the map, the inherited tradition, or even a self-chosen ideology fails entirely? The crisis of the map, anomaly, and dissolution.
Right, so the cultural map of meaning rests on this critical, implicit assumption that sufficient exploration of the world has already happened and that what works is fundamentally true, but the universes change, which guarantees the appearance of anomaly.
Anomaly, by its very definition, is information that the existing classification system cannot absorb. It threatens the integrity of the known world. The source identifies 4 primary and often intertwined types of anomaly that necessitate a cultural update.
We have rapid environmental change, which is external, contact with a previously isolated foreign culture, the development of a new skill or abstraction within the group, and finally, revolutionary heroic activity.
All 4 of these introduce facts that the Great Father, the existing order, simply cannot account for. And when this anomaly strikes, the system risks what we might call the cascade of criticism.
This is a complex idea. Could you explain why questioning one small belief can undermine the entire psychological structure?
Well, our knowledge is hierarchical and deeply interconnected. It flows from the deepest, most unconscious layers all the way up to our most explicit verbal rules. So at the bottom, you have the processual imagistic personality, that deep procedural wisdom, and at the top are the semantic rules, the explicit verbal justifications. So a casual critique of just one small explicit presumption, a semantic rule, can actually weaken the integrity of the entire system. That includes the unconscious, imagistic, and procedural personality structures. And it can destroy the emotional stability that goes along with them.
It's like pulling a single thread from an ancient, complex tapestry without understanding that the entire pattern depends on the tension created by that one thread.
That's a perfect analogy. If what you thought was true at the highest, most articulate level is suddenly refuted, say, a core economic assumption you held, that refutation can destabilize the integrity of what you do, your procedures, and what you imagine, your stories. The individual becomes psychically vulnerable, open to existential despair because their ability to categorize reality has been fundamentally challenged.
And the mind fights back hard against this desolation.
Oh, it does. As the source illustrates with those perceptual experiments involving anomalous playing cards, like a red ace of spades, the mind initially attempts to violently force the unexpected data to fit known categories. But when that fails, there's acute personal suffering, anxiety, and a genuine disintegration of the capacity to categorize the world at all.
So this necessary confrontation with anomaly forces a process of revolutionary adaptation, which is visualized in that stable-to-crisis cycle. The stable, predictable movement from the present state to the desired future state is utterly interrupted.
It's a total rupture and reformulation. The cycle moves from a stable condition to a violation of the anomaly into a crisis, and then hopefully to rectification. A truly revolutionary anomaly necessitates a complete descent of disintegration back into chaos.
So the comfortable, rewarding, and predictable present just vanishes, and the future opens up like an abyss.
And the dissolution of that stable state means that the determined meaning of experiential objects, the glass sculpture is terrifying, reverts to its pre-classified chaos. And this return to the undifferentiated state is paradoxically experienced as being simultaneously and unbearably threatening, and secondarily and infinitely promising.
The threat is paralysis and death. The known world is gone. But the promise is renewal, the possibility of building a new, better order.
Chaos, the domain of the unknown, is the prima materia for all reformulation. The crisis is a forced return to the formless, indescribable state that precedes any structured mythology or cosmology. It sets the stage for new creation. But the individual's immediate, overwhelming psychological apprehension of this state, which manifests as paralyzing fear, is what prevents creative readaptation.
So cultural order, the Great Father, is ultimately a necessary shield against this primordial fear.
It's our protective enclosure. Without this structure, the cognitive load and the emotional terror of existence would make life an immediate, meaningless tragedy, with no hope for successful action or redemption. Identification with the group and its moral map is the protective buffer against the maternal sea of chaos.
But this shield is highly conditional. The stability of the culture depends on its durability. Yet we know that the inflexibility of the Great Father structure will eventually lead to tyranny and collapse.
Because the future continuously brings the unknown. So inflexibility and the unwillingness to alter the map guarantees extinction. The source is very clear on this. The only certainty is that rigidity will bring destruction, and readaptation cannot be a simple adjustment. It may require a partial or complete reincarnation of the entire system, altering the fundamental meaning of experience and behavior.
And crucially, that capacity for moral updating and restructuring of the shared map cannot come from the rigid, self-preserving order itself. The Father cannot willingly dismantle the safety it provides.
Dogmatic loyalty to tradition and custom, that slavish or, patriotic clinging to the known, only guarantees that tradition will collapse in a sudden, dangerous, and often violent fashion. Totalitarianism, after all, is characterized by its belief in an absolutely rigid ideological map and its refusal to admit error or incorporate anomaly.
And that raises the fundamental question. If the order cannot change itself, who possesses the power, the vision, and the courage to step outside the cultural map, face the chaos, and generate the necessary new meaning?
It falls to the rare individual who detects the dragon of anomaly, or at least admits its presence before everyone else, and who leads the charge toward the terrifying unknown.
In the next part of our analysis, we will examine the essential role of the heroic figure in this process of cultural transformation and the creation of the next iteration of the shared map. The analysis will continue next time. Continuing the analysis, we will now discuss the appearance of the anomaly, a challenge for the shared map.
This is really where the theoretical framework we've been building finally meets reality.
Where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. We've spent time defining these big territories of experience, the known world of order, and then this vast, formless potential of the unknown, of chaos.
We've mapped the boundaries.
We have. And now we're going to examine the moment those boundaries are actually violated. What happens to the human mind, to the human psyche, when that occurs?
And this is so critical for anyone listening. If you're navigating any kind of major change, maybe a career that's completely stalled, or even just feeling disoriented by a big cultural shift, this part of the source material is, well, it's the engine room.
It is.
We all operate on this assumption that the world is predictable. The text calls it our internal map, our shared system of meaning. So the big question here is, what happens when that map, that whole sophisticated system we've internalized, is suddenly made useless by something completely unexpected?
And that something is the anomaly.
The disruptive intrusion.
Right. And the stakes here, they aren't just philosophical. They're immediate. We are talking about the deep psychological machinery and the social machinery, too, that just fractures under that kind of pressure.
The anomaly is really chaos making an unwelcome entry into the tidy, controlled space of order.
And our goal is to really understand the mechanics of that intrusion and the breakdown that follows.
But let's be clear about the scale here. We're not just discussing, say, a minor inconvenience like getting a flat tire.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
A truly significant anomaly, what the source calls a revolutionary novelty, is an event that completely invalidates your core assumptions about how the world works.
And what's so fascinating is how our own biology, our own hardware, deals with this. The source material points to figure 2.3, the ambivalent nature of novelty.
Yes. When we're faced with something genuinely unknown, something complex, our brain generates two completely opposite emotional states at the same time.
And that internal conflict is it's the core of the whole experience, isn't it? It's promise, hope and curiosity on one hand.
And threat. Fear and anxiety on the other.
So we're pulled toward the potential of the new thing, but at the exact same moment, we're terrified of what it might cost us to adapt to it.
It's an immediate, often paralyzing internal conflict. The unknown is where all future good things come from, but it's also the source of all existential danger. You can't just label it good or bad right
You
away.
have to hold both possibilities at once.
You have to hold them in tension, at least until you can process what you're dealing with.
Okay, so before we get to the catastrophe, let's unpack the system that gets shattered. Let's talk about the shared map, because the anomaly's impact only makes sense if we understand the stable structure it's breaking.
That's right. The shared map isn't just a list of facts. It's this comprehensive, deeply internalized framework, both cultural and personal, that gives us a sense of purpose and stability.
It's what lets us move forward.
It is. It tells us what to pay attention to, and just as importantly, what we can safely ignore. The source material breaks this down by framing all of our actions, all goal-directed behavior, around three core questions.
Right, and these questions effectively define our reality, our motivation. The first one sets the starting point. What is the current state?
Or, as the source phrases it, and I think this is key, OKA, o presente insuportable, the unbearable present.
That's such a strong choice of words, unbearable.
It is, and it speaks directly to motivation. I mean, think about it. If the present were absolutely perfect, why would you ever do anything?
You'd have no reason to act.
None. So our current state is always defined by some kind of deficiency, some dissatisfaction. There's always a gap between where you are and where you want to be. And that gap, that's the psychological engine for everything we do.
Which leads right into the second question, the destination. What should be the end goal?
The o que deveria ser.
O futuro ideal. The ideal future.
And this isn't just, I want to finish my project. It's bigger than that, much bigger. It's often a symbolic, almost imaginary state of perfection. It's a place of relief, of completion. In mythological terms, you could call it the promised land. It's the destination that makes the whole journey worthwhile.
It's the perfect counterpoint to the unbearable present.
Exactly. And then the third question is the bridge between them, the how.
Therefore, how should we act?
Right. It specifies the whole sequence of behaviors, the plan, the process that you believe will transform that current unbearable state into the future you desire.
So this structure, present, future, and the actions to connect them, it's a necessary simplification of an infinitely complex world.
It has to be. It restricts all that ambiguity into manageable chunks of meaning. It gives our actions predictability and makes it possible to even have goals in the first place. When you're operating inside that map, you know what matters and what doesn't.
And the payoff for having a map that works is this incredible efficiency. When the map is solid, your behavior becomes, well, automatic.
It conserves a massive amount of mental energy.
The book uses that great analogy of the office worker walking to the elevator while reading a document.
It's a perfect example. If you were to stop that person and ask them, describe the exact sequence of muscle movements and visual cues you just used to get here, they couldn't do it.
Not a chance.
Why? Because the map is so effective, the behavior is so deeply learned, it's what the source calls processual. It's happening below the level of conscious thought.
They're focused on reading and their bodies just effortlessly running this complex, learned program in the background.
And every time they succeed, every time they reach the elevator without tripping, that success sends a powerful signal back to the brain.
The system works.
Your model of reality is correct. You can trust your categories. It reinforces the entire structure.
Okay, so that's the individual. How does this connect to the bigger picture? How is that personal map protected? This is where the source brings in the idea of the Great Father.
Right. The Great Father is the symbol for the known, the patriarchal, the cultural world. And its primary psychological function is to act as a shield.
A shield against what?
Against the paralyzing fear that comes from being constantly exposed to the unknown. Culture, the established order, is fundamentally a product of history.
So it's built from all the successful explorations of the past.
Precisely. Every custom, every law, every social structure is like a wall that our ancestors built to hold back the infinite, formless potential of nature, which is often symbolized as the Great Mother or chaos.
So culture is a necessary container. It keeps the terror at bay.
It does. When you adopt a group identity, that identity limits the meaning of things for you. It makes social interactions predictable. You don't have to wake up every single morning and solve the problem of existence from scratch.
The culture has done a lot of that work for you.
A phenomenal amount. And the source uses that mythological anecdote about the death of the king to really drive this point home.
It's such a powerful metaphor for what happens when a system collapses.
Because the king isn't just a ruler. He's the model for behavior, the peak of the hierarchy of order. So his death, mythologically speaking, is like the main wall of the fortress breaking.
And what pours in?
Chaos, rain, flood, the uninhibited unknown. It's not just a change in leadership, it's a cosmological crisis. The very structure that gave the world predictability is gone.
The Great Father, the protective mechanism, has failed.
And that failure of the outer wall immediately threatens the security of every individual psyche within it. The king's death means your personal map is no longer sanctioned, no longer guaranteed by the highest authority.
You're suddenly exposed.
Completely exposed to the raw, undifferentiated potential of chaos. And that is terrifying because it means the tools you've always relied on for survival might not work anymore. This is the stage that's set for the anomaly to appear.
So we have this highly efficient, culturally protected bubble of order. But of course, order is never perfect. Change is constant. So we have to start separating the different kinds of surprises life throws at us.
That's a critical distinction. Not all unexpected events cause the map to fail.
Right. Most novelty is actually, well, trivial.
Our systems are built to handle it. The source calls this normal novelty. Let's go back to that office worker in the hallway, like in figure 2.4. This time, as they're walking along reading, they encounter a chair left in the middle of the path.
Okay, so that's a classic low-stakes anomaly.
It is. The map has to be updated, but it's a very small local update. The anomaly, the chair, is identified and integrated almost instantly.
Your main goal, getting to the elevator, isn't threatened at all.
Not in the slightest. The plan is just slightly altered. You walk around it, maybe you move it. It just requires selecting an alternative means to get to the exact same end.
It might cause a moment of irritation, but it's not an existential crisis. The source calls these things punits and threats.
Right. They're just events that signal a temporary problem with a specific action. The elevator is running late, you get annoyed maybe, but you don't panic. You know the objective is still valid.
But then there's the other kind, the revolutionary novelty.
The psychological bomb. This is when an event is so significant that your current goal-directed behavior is just, it's violently convulsed.
It's not that your path is blocked anymore.
No, it's that the very nature of your destination, or maybe even your starting point, is suddenly thrown into question. The event reveals a deep, fundamental error in your guiding story, in your entire operational model of reality.
So what does our system do when the normal automatic responses just completely fail?
The organism immediately fires off the orienting reflex. It's an ancient, deep-seated reflex that overrides everything else when the incomprehensible appears. It forces you to pay attention.
And this is where that dual emotional state comes rushing in from figure 2.3.
Immediately, you get that simultaneous fusion of hope and curiosity, the promise and fear and anxiety, the threat.
Why is that duality always there when we face the truly unknown?
Because you have to approach it. That's where all the new information required for your survival and adaptation is. That's the promise. But to approach it, you have to leave the safety of your current map.
Which exposes you to danger, maybe even destruction?
That's the threat. So the orienting reflex forces a full stop on all current action. You have to stop and engage in a very deep evaluation.
And that evaluation, that's what the source calls controlled processing.
Yes, and this is the hard part. It's slow, it's conscious, it's generative work. It takes real effort.
So consciousness isn't just watching from the sideline.
No, not at all. It appears as this vital phenomenon that is critically involved in evaluating novelty. Its fundamental job is to take the formless potential of the unexpected and try, somehow, to place it into a context you can understand.
We become conscious when our automatic programming fails.
That's a great way to put it. We become conscious when the world demands that nice. We update our fundamental reality.
And this whole initial assessment process leans heavily on one side of the brain, doesn't it? The right hemisphere.
It does. This idea of hemispheric categorization is one of the most technical, but also one of the most profound insights in the source material.
So the left hemisphere is for the known, the categorized, the verbal.
The determined structure. The right hemisphere, on the other hand, specializes in handling things that are less determined, more diffuse, more novel.
So when the anomaly hits, the right brain mobilizes first. But how can it categorize something if, by definition, there's no category for it yet?
It does it by not asking, what is this thing empirically? It doesn't care about objective identity at first. It categorizes it by its motivational significance.
Okay, what does that actually mean?
The source uses the term valency. It's the emotional or behavioral charge of a thing. The first question the right brain asks is always, how is this new thing relative to my survival?
So it's not what is it, it's should I run from it or move toward it?
Precisely. Is it dangerous and threatening, or is it satisfactory and promising? The first categorization is based entirely on behavioral suggestion, long before you have any facts.
That makes perfect sense. Your gut reaction to a real threat is visceral. It happens way before you can put a name to what's scaring you.
It's the body's wisdom. It prioritizes survival over definition. If the right hemisphere registers a high threat valency, you freeze or you flee, even if you have no conscious idea what you're fleeing from.
And if we can't establish that initial valency, if the thing remains totally ambiguous.
That's when the real trouble starts. That's when the psychic collapse begins.
Right.
Because your system gets stuck in this impossible tension between approach and avoidance.
So if the anomaly can't be solved trivially, if that orienting reflex can't find a simple path forward, we enter this full-blown crisis state.
We do. We move into what the source calls the revolutionary novelty. And that demands a complete rupture and reformulation of everything, your understanding of the present, your goals for the future.
This is the descita de disintegration, the descent of disintegration.
It is. And it's a cascade effect. It's so devastating because our knowledge is all interconnected across these three different levels. A failure in one area threatens the entire structure at once.
Okay, let's break down those three levels because understanding them seems crucial to understanding the collapse.
It is. You can think of it like a hierarchy. At the very top, the most explicit level, you have semantic knowledge.
This is our factual knowledge, things we can say out loud.
Exactly. Your political beliefs, scientific theories, religious doctrines, everything you can articulate as a truth.
Okay, and below that?
Below that is episodic knowledge. This is your personal story. The memory of specific events, your biography, the narrative of your life. It's the what happened to me part.
And the two are connected. If your semantic beliefs change, you have to reevaluate your life story.
Absolutely. Imagine you find out that a mentor you trusted for years was actually a complete fraud. That's a semantic change. But it forces you to go back and recategorize every single episodic memory you have of that person.
Every conversation, every piece of advice.
It all changes meaning. And at the very bottom, the deepest, most fundamental layer is processual knowledge.
This is the stuff that's mostly unconscious.
Almost entirely. It's our implicit behavioral rules, our habits, our routines, our motor skills, even our baseline emotional stability. It's the operating system, the nonverbal knowledge of how to be in the world.
So a revolutionary anomaly, a crisis at that top semantic level, like losing your faith in a core belief, can actually shake the foundations of that deep processual level.
That is precisely the warning in the source material. It says that casual criticism of an explicit belief can, over time, weaken the entire unconscious personality and lead to emotional instability.
Which explains why cultural traditions are so conservative.
Yes, that inertia exists for a reason. Because change, even at the highest, most abstract level, can have these dangerous, unintended side effects on an individual's basic ability to function.
And there's that famous Brunner card experiment, which is just a chilling illustration of what happens when our categories fail.
It's a perfect demonstration. The experiment shows the system's initial resistance to an anomaly and then its catastrophic collapse.
So they showed people anomalous playing cards, right? Like a black 4 of hearts.
Or a red 6 of spades. And they flashed them very quickly. At first, people they filtered out the contradiction. They would see the black 4 of hearts as either a normal 4 of hearts or a normal 4 of spades.
They just forced the anomaly into a known category. They weren't even aware they were doing it.
Their map was fighting to maintain the illusion of order. But as the researchers increased the exposure time, the system started to struggle. People would hesitate. They'd get anxious.
And eventually their cognitive categories just failed completely.
And for some, the result was what the source explicitly calls acute personal suffering.
There's that one quote from a volunteer that's just so visceral. I can't form the set. It didn't even look like a card then. I don't know what color it is now or whether it's spades or hearts.
See, the loss of the category is the loss of the ability to define reality.
If you can't categorize it, you can't act on it.
And if you can't act, you lose control. That failure leads directly into psychic collapse, the descent into the abyss. You lose the comfortable, predictable present, and the source says the future opens in the form of a pit.
What's actually happening to someone psychologically during that collapse?
They regress. They fall back into what the source calls chaos cosmogonico pre-cosmogonic chaos.
Hmm.
It's a state before order was ever established.
Where everything is possible.
Yes, but that's the terror of it. Everything is simultaneously terrifying because it's unknown, and infinitely promising because it contains all potential. But because the individual's map is broken, they can't harness any of that potential. They can only experience the terror.
The source gives some pretty vivid descriptions of what this looks like. The inability to act, the disruption of just basic routines.
The symptoms are debilitating because that deepest processual level has been destabilized. Sleep, appetite, they become completely dysregulated. The person becomes anxious, hopeless, unpredictably aggressive.
And inside, it's a guerra interna de emoción, an internal war of emotion.
All the motivational forces, the gods that used to drive you toward clear goals, are now just fighting each other for control. It leads to total desolation.
The paralysis that Tolstoy described after his own beliefs fell apart is probably the most profound example of this.
It is. Tolstoy talks about how he started asking the fundamental why about his life, why his fame, his family, his work. And he was horrified to find he had no answer.
He realized life has no meaning within his old framework.
And if there's no meaning, there's no desire. And if there's no desire, there's no justification for any action. He literally describes feeling so paralyzed he couldn't move his hand to write or even walk to the next room.
And that profound loss of meaning, that functional paralysis, that's what opens the door to suicidal ideation.
It's the desire to escape that terrifying, uninhibited emotional landscape. The shield of the shared map is gone, and the person feels completely exposed. It's the maximum crisis state. The system has to either adapt radically or it will just cease to exist.
So disintegration seems like the natural consequence of this kind of revolutionary novelty. But the source material doesn't just leave us there in the abyss. It provides a clear framework for renewal.
It does. The solution is called adaptação revolutionaria, revolutionary adaptation. And it's characterized by this cycle of dissolution and rebirth, which mirrors all the great cultural myths: paradise, chaos, the fall, and then redemption.
And this is what the source calls the heroic necessity.
It is. You cannot just wait for the chaos to go away. You have to voluntarily confront the very thing that caused the disintegration. This is the journey of the hero, or the knower, the one who mediates between the known world of culture, the great father, and the unknown world of nature, the great mother.
So the hero has to willingly step outside the safe walls of the old order to face the anomaly. And this means accepting the segunda iniciação, the second initiation. What does that mean psychologically?
It means you have to allow for the disintegration of your socially determined personality. The person you were, the person who was protected by that old salty map, has to symbolically die.
That sounds terrifying.
It is terrifying because that old identity, as flawed as it was the only thing keeping the fear at bay. The hero has to sacrifice the known in order to gain access to the adaptive potential hidden in the unknown.
And the source draws this incredible parallel to shamanic initiation rituals. Can you explain how that mythical process mirrors this psychological one?
In many of these traditions, the person who is to become a shaman first goes through a period of intense psychic rupture. They might behave erratically, suffer from visions. It's the complete collapse of the normal, profane man.
The old identity is breaking down.
It is. And then the ritual itself often mirrors this physically. The shaman's body is symbolically dismembered. They're reduced to a skeleton. Their organs are removed. Maybe they're devoured by a mythical beast, only to be put back together with new magical organs.
That symbolic dismemberment, that's the return to the pre-cosmogonic chaos. Why is that specific painful regression so necessary for renewal?
It's the ultimate test. It proves that the new identity isn't dependent on the old, flawed cultural framework. By going all the way back to the formless origin, the hero gains the ability to build a new, stronger, more adaptive personality.
One that can handle the ambiguity of the unknown, which the old personality couldn't.
Exactly. They can now carry the knowledge of chaos without being destroyed by it. You don't just rebuild the wall with the same old blueprints. You have to go out into the wilderness, find new material, and build a better map.
And this requires a very specific psychological posture, this paradox of humility and courage.
Yes. And this posture is the exact opposite of the rigidity that caused the crisis in the first place. Humility, in this context, is defined as the constant admission of error and capacity for error.
The hero has to always maintain the possibility that their current knowledge is wrong.
Fundamentally flawed, yes.
But why does that take courage? On the surface, it sounds like a kind of weakness.
It takes profound courage. Because admitting you might be wrong means admitting your entire protective worldview could be built on sand. It means facing the terrifying possibility that everything you've done, everything you valued, might be based on a mistake.
It means embracing the anxiety of uncertainty.
And facing the chaos without the psychological shield of being absolutely certain. That takes bravery.
Okay, so if the hero embodies that renewal, who is the adversary in this story?
The adversary, who is often mythologized as the tyrant or the dragon, embodies the opposite posture, the totalitarian presumption of absolute knowledge, the arrogancia da postura totalitaria.
And the source material claims this arrogance is actually rooted in cowardice.
It is. That totalitarian rigidity comes from a paralyzing fear of the unpredictable. The authoritarian figure insists that the map is perfect and demands that all novelty, all anomalies, must simply disappear.
They refuse to change the system.
Not because they're strong, but because they are terrified of the internal collapse that would happen if they admitted an error. They hate the hero precisely because the hero brings necessary, painful renewal.
Which means that the tyrannical attitude, by trying to maintain this rigid predictability and refusing to adapt, is the very thing that guarantees its own eventual catastrophic collapse.
It refuses to pay the price of admission to the future. A system that won't integrate the anomaly just ensures that the anomaly will come back later, more violently, and without any warning.
Whereas the hero takes that threatening unknown and transforms it.
Exactly. How do they do that?
How does that transformation happen in a practical sense?
By confronting the unknown voluntarily, the hero turns it from something purely threatening into something benevolent, or at least beneficial. They don't just put a new label on it. They divide the world of the unpredictable into new, distinguishable elements. They create new categories. They weave a net of determined meaning over it.
So they integrate the chaos into a new, more comprehensive and more functional map.
And that allows them, and by extension their culture, to focus once again on the innately interesting and effectively significant events of the present. It makes the previously unbearable present bearable again. And more importantly, it makes it actionable. The system gets an upgrade, and the cycle of order, chaos, and renewal is complete until the next anomaly appears.
So we've spent this deep dive exploring this entire mechanism of collapse, how the anomaly shatters that three-tiered shared map, how that induces a state of psychic disintegration, and then how that crisis forces the individual into this heroic, voluntary confrontation with chaos.
That anxiety, that internal war.
Yeah.
It's the necessary psychological process you have to go through to generate genuine new meaning and update your model of reality.
The knowers, these heroic individuals, are simultaneously the creators of the new and the most profound danger to the existing rigid order.
And the capacity for renewal is paid for with the dissolution of the old self.
Here is the final provocative thought that the source material leaves you with. The rigidity of a system, the refusal to alter the map, the insistence on the current status quo, and the belief that current knowledge is absolute. It's all rooted in a paralyzing fear of the unpredictable.
But that refusal to integrate the anomaly, to sacrifice the old identity, is the very thing that guarantees the violent collapse and ultimate extinction of that tradition in the future.
Change that is refused is simply catastrophe guaranteed, because the chaos doesn't just go away, it waits. And it comes back harder.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What anomalies are we, as individuals or as a culture, refusing to categorize and integrate right now? And what price will our systems eventually pay for that act of collective cowardice?
A truly high-stakes internal and external struggle. That is all we have time for today on The Deep Dive.
The analysis of this material will continue next time. In this last part, we're going to talk about Chapter 5, focusing on the ultimate choice, presented by the two figures who mediate between order and chaos, the hero and the adversary. This segment isn't just a summary either. It's really the culmination of everything we've discussed, the final, most crucial confrontation that governs individual meaning and societal fate.
That's exactly right. For those of you who have followed this deep dive, we've spent a lot of time establishing this core psychological and mythological architecture of experience.
Right.
We have the known, which we've called order, or, the Great Father, and then we have the unknown, chaos, the Great Mother, which is simultaneously the source of all terror, but also all potential for new life.
And the human project is really defined by that third element, the eternal connoisseur, the process that has to mediate between these two vast forces.
It is. And our mission today is to unpack the two radically different paths that this mediating process, this connoisseur, can actually take.
And it's such a stark difference, isn't it? It's the difference between embracing the world as this terrifying yet yet redeemable reality, or rejecting the world completely in favor of a static, controlled illusion.
It is. We are looking at the moral and psychological distinction between the hero and the adversary, the so-called hostile siblings.
And we're going to see why one path leads to a meaningful existence and the other leads, pretty much inevitably, to what the sources call the inferno, to total destruction.
It's a heavy topic, but it's arguably the most important one.
Okay, so let's unpack this core structure one last time, just to really ground ourselves before we get into the specific characteristics of the siblings. We have to understand the interplay of these three permanent constituent elements of experience.
We really do, because it's so important to remember these aren't just like characters in an old story. They are psychological structures that are perpetually active in your own mind and in society right now.
So first up, we have the eternal unknown. We define this as the Great Mother. What makes her so terrifyingly fundamental?
Well, she is nature itself. She's both the womb and the grave, the source and the destination of all things.
Everything comes from her and everything returns to her.
Precisely. And mythologically, she is affective, she is feeling, and she is ambivalently feminine. That means she's simultaneously promising this new birth, new potential, while also threatening catastrophic destruction.
And crucially, she's the domain of pure novelty.
Yes. She is that which has not yet been named, not yet been mapped or controlled. She is pure, raw, unclassified reality.
And standing against that, or maybe trying to contain it, is the eternal known, the Great Father.
Right. This is our established culture, the defined territory, the city walls, the rules. It's the cumulative consequence of all the successful exploratory behavior that our ancestors undertook.
It's what works, or at least what has worked.
Exactly. The Great Father provides those protective walls, giving us the safety and predictability we need to survive. But, and this is the crucial part, he is also inherently tyrannical. The moment a rule is established, it demands conformity, it resists change, and it restricts any new exploratory behavior that might threaten the established order. This is the tragic paradox of civilization itself.
Order becomes rigidity. Protection becomes a prison.
It can. Which brings us to the key figure, the mediator, the eternal connoisseur, or the word, the logos. This is the process itself, the individual entity. It's you who has to navigate between the protective tyranny of the father and the potentially destructive novelty of the mother.
So the connoisseur's job is what? To explore?
To take exploratory action, that's its eternal job. It is the knight who rides out to kill the dragon of chaos. And that's the act of replacing confusion with certainty, of transforming the threatening unknown into something beneficial.
And the dragon's hoard, the treasure, that's the new knowledge and the adaptive flexibility you gain from that confrontation.
Exactly. And this is the moment of divergence. This is the fork in the road. The connoisseur, this mediating force, can resolve itself in one of two ways.
It's the internal moral structure of the logos that creates the twin possibilities, the hero or the adversary.
Yes. The sources make it absolutely clear that the core distinction is how the unknown is approached.
Okay.
If it is approached with, say, humility, a desire for truth, and courage, you generate the hero. If it is approached with fear, rigid certainty, and the need to maintain a comfortable lie, you generate the adversary.
There are two different strategies for survival, then.
They are, but only one of them is ultimately sustainable in the long run.
Let's start with the dark side of that dichotomy, the adversary, this archetype of absolute opposition. We see this figure in characters like Set, the twin and eternal opponent of Osiris.
Right, and Osiris is the idealized image of the known, the established king, the great father. He's order personified.
So what is the adversary's fundamental pattern of adaptation? What's he trying to do?
The adversary, whether you call him Set or Satan or, the spirit of ideology itself, represents a pattern that is characterized by absolute opposition to establishing genuine, adaptable, divine order.
Okay, so it's not just that he disagrees. He is opposition itself.
That's a great way to put it. And the sources really emphasize that this figure's motivation is purely positional. It's about power. They exist only to protect or advance their position within the existing power hierarchy.
And they'll do that regardless of whether that existing order is clearly counterproductive or even destructive to the general welfare.
It doesn't matter. It suggests a total failure of long-term vision. They're only interested in winning the current game, even if winning means destroying the game board itself.
That's a chilling thought.
It is. And the consequence of this positional, self-serving focus is a deep, profound contempt for human existence itself. Because if the world is only a hierarchy to be manipulated, then truth and meaning and suffering, They're all irrelevant.
Only pattern matters.
Only power matters, and that cynicism is unbelievably corrosive.
We've seen this pattern manifest historically as the spirit underlying totalitarianism. The sources break this down into three defining characteristics. What's the first one?
First is rigid ideological belief. This is the absolute predominance of the rational, controlling mind that demands everything must be contained and managed.
It's the belief that the map is perfect.
Exactly. The adversary insists that their map of the world is perfect, which means the unknown novelty, error, or deviation is simply not permitted to exist. They believe they have the final, perfect solution to the problem of existence.
And when you believe your map is perfect, you stop exploring, which I imagine brings us to the second characteristic, the dependence on the lie.
It has to. The lie is the refusal to admit error. It's the refusal to appreciate the necessity of deviation from the established rule. If the known order is starting to decay, or if reality produces an anomaly that challenges the ideology, the adversary must deny the anomaly's existence.
They would rather falsify reality than suffer the cognitive dissonance of admitting they might be wrong.
Right, and that's the rejection of the process of knowing. It's a total shutdown.
So what happens to a person or a system that refuses to admit error and clings to a lie that separates it from reality?
Well, that leads inevitably to the third characteristic, the inevitability of hatred.
Hatred for what?
For everything. For the self, for the world. Once reality is falsified to maintain your position or your sense of security, the natural negative aspects of experience, the suffering, the inevitable failures, your limitations, they can no longer be integrated or learned from.
So you have to blame them on something else.
You have to. They're blamed on external sources or on the parts of yourself that failed to live up to the impossible ideal. This produces a profound inner torture, a kind of internalized inferno.
And that inferno then motivates what?
Acts worse than suicide. It leads to a character defined by infinite hate and envy, someone who finds pleasure only in destruction.
So if we boil it all down, the core sin here is this presumption of omniscience. It's the act of knowing everything.
It is the ultimate hubris. And practically speaking, it means the unknown ceases to exist for them. That makes further exploration not just superfluous, but actively dangerous, even treacherous.
This is total identification with the rigid known, the established, often decaying father archetype. And so it's a rejection of the humble process of coming to know.
Which is the very essence of the Logos, the creative spirit. If the Logos is the spirit of truth and adaptation, the adversary is the spirit that says, I have the definitive answer, and anyone who questions it is not merely mistaken, but morally evil.
And that's why identification with rigid ideology leads to such catastrophic human results. It's an adaptive strategy that is absolutely doomed to fail. The second reality inevitably shifts.
It's built on a foundation of sand.
So in stark contrast to that destructive certainty of the adversary, we have the hero. The hero embodies the positive potential of the connoisseur.
Right. The hero represents the eternal willingness to take a creative measure, to originate new behavioral patterns, and to transform the unknown into something beneficial.
And the hero's function is defined by
What?
a single key action.
Voluntary exposure. That's the key. They willingly step outside the protective city walls and contact the anomaly, the uncertainty, the chaos. They don't wait for chaos to arrive and overwhelm them.
They seek it out.
They seek it out. And that voluntary contact is what differentiates the hero from, say, the victim or the coward.
This leads to this really interesting metaphor of the contaminated hero, or the redeemer who is crucified as the dragon of chaos and transformation. What does it mean for the hero to be contaminated?
It's such a vital insight. To confront the unknown, you have to enter its domain. You have to, in some sense, adopt its attributes. The hero takes on the properties of the dragon they slay.
So they absorb the chaos.
They absorb the chaos, the new frightening information, the uncertainty. They are temporarily contaminated by the very elements that the status quo fears. But by voluntarily submitting to this contamination, by accepting the anxiety, the guilt, the shame that comes with breaking the mold, the hero transforms the unknown into an eternal source of strength, capacity, and new knowledge.
Which means the hero's return to the kingdom of threatened order often appears dangerous and destructive to those who are clinging to the rigid known.
Absolutely. The stability of the prevailing status quo is very often merely apparent. It's an illusion. The hero is the one who detects the genuine dragon of change, the anomaly that indicates the old rules are failing, and conducts the charge.
And when they return, they're carrying information that directly contradicts the rigid ideology. They're bringing new hypotheses, formulating new values.
And how do you think the established order typically reacts to this vital new information?
With fear and hatred.
With fear and hatred. They confuse the anomaly itself, the strange new idea, the necessary correction, with the spirit of rejection, with the devil. They believe that by repressing the hero, they are patriotically preserving tradition.
But what they're actually preserving is the decay.
Exactly. The more tyrannical the attitude of the old order, the more they fear and hate the hero, precisely because the hero embodies the capacity to say, our current rules are insufficient and this is the new truth we must incorporate.
The hero is hated for demanding growth.
Yes, and that tension, the need for the hero to break the rules to save the system, is the eternal paradox that separated the adaptive society from the one that is doomed to collapse.
Okay, let's delve deeper now into the consequence of choosing the path of the adversary, starting with the foundation of that choice, the lie.
Right.
We define the lie not just as, stating a falsehood, but as the declaration of fear in the face of genuine experience. It's saying it really shouldn't be this way, it really didn't happen, when reality contradicts your preferred narrative.
And that's a profound moral transaction, isn't it? The lie is the abandonment of individual interest, which is your pursuit of meaning, your connection to the divine logos in exchange for immediate perceived security.
But hold on, if someone lies to protect their job or their reputation, doesn't that provide security? Why is that trade-off fundamentally tragic? Couldn't they just become, harmlessly, comfortably deluded?
No, that's the thing. They can't. Because the act of lying fundamentally weakens the individual. It restricts their competence, often without them even realizing it.
How does it do that?
Every time you deny a truth, you narrow your adaptive flexibility. You become less capable of dealing with the next unforeseen event because your map of the world is now intentionally inaccurate.
And by rejecting the truth, you guarantee that life's inevitable suffering and tragedy become meaningless.
Exactly. If your suffering serves no purpose, if it doesn't inform you or motivate you to correct your course, it simply drains you. It becomes pointless torture.
This abandonment, then, it guarantees either internal psychological degeneration or forced identification with a rigid group.
It does. The sources suggest that when an individual chooses narrow, restricted goals, let's say security above all else, or raw power, or only sensual pleasure, they must actively suppress the necessary redemptive behaviors.
Honesty becomes a threat.
Honesty is a threat. Exploration is defined as too risky. If your highest ideal is comfort, you will define everything that disrupts that comfort as bad, even if it's a necessary truth.
And the resulting personality, which lacks development and adaptive flexibility, then turns to resentment and hatred when life's inevitable challenges just crush their rigid, comfort-based world.
Precisely. They lack the tools to adapt, so they lash out at the world for failing to conform to their illusion. They become resentful that they must suffer at all, and that resentment fuels the dark fire of the adversary.
This pursuit of total security through the lie, it leads directly to what you called the internalized inferno.
It does. The desire for total identification with the cultural canon requires the denial of deviation, which in turn guarantees that the negative aspects of experience take control.
And this internal torture it sounds deeply insidious.
It is. The denial of reality guarantees the accumulation of internal pressure, and that pressure often motivates acts worse than simple suicide. It's the impulse to lash out and make others suffer in the same way, or to find peace only in destruction.
We're capable of abstracting our own finitude, our own death, and that permanently contaminates our experience with threat.
It does, and lying is the failure to manage that inherent tragedy honorably.
This brings us to a crucial concept drawn from the sources, one that builds on Hannah Arendt's work, the evil of banality. Or, as the source suggests, the more precise term, mal da banalidade.
Right.
Why is this Portuguese phrase, the evil of banality, a more useful description than this simple English term?
Because it emphasizes the sickness, the mal that arises from the commonplace, the banalidade. Aren't focused on the thoughtlessness of evil, the idea that perpetrators weren't demonic, but were just bureaucratic cogs in a machine.
Just following orders.
Just following orders. But the sources here argue that it's more active than mere thoughtlessness. It is the insidious, cumulative result of small weaknesses, small lies, and small moral failures that accumulate and multiply.
So the small act of choosing comfort over truth today is a single component in the massive moral disease that becomes a state-level atrocity tomorrow.
Exactly. It comforts us to assume that, camp guards or totalitarian fanatics were fundamentally monstrous, that they were different from us. But the terrifying insight is that the normal man is capable of immense evil when they find security in illusion and obedience.
And so we have to recognize that the potential for terrible cruelty and suffering resides within the self.
We have to. The capacity to commit torture is part of the human repertoire.
And that self-recognition, the willingness to stare into the abyss of one's own potential for evil, is actually a precondition for deep character improvement.
Absolutely. If you do not recognize your own capacity for evil, you cannot control it. The individual who just assumes they are inherently good, who denies the darkness within, is the one most likely to inflict the greatest suffering while rationalizing it as necessary for the greater good.
So the adversary is often born from the denial of personal darkness, hiding behind a rigid moral mask.
That's a very common pathway.
Now, if the adversary manifests as rigid ideology on one hand, the flip side fear of the unknown manifesting as nihilism is captured perfectly by Dostoevsky's protagonist in Notes from the Underground, the metaphorical rat.
The mouse or the rat in Dostoevsky's basement. He's a figure of elevated, painfully self-conscious awareness. He has accumulated so many questions and doubts about the purpose and the justice and the meaning of the world that he simply cannot act.
He's paralyzed by his own intellect.
Completely. He is paralyzingly aware of the complexity of every decision and the arbitrary nature of every goal. It's the sophisticated inability to act.
And why is this paralyzing realization, the sense that life has no inherent meaning, which contaminates all goals with the question, and then what? Why is that so corrosive?
Because action requires commitment to a fixed purpose. It requires a degree of willful ignorance, you could say. If you are constantly aware that the purpose you commit to might be arbitrary or temporary or just culturally constructed, the will is paralyzed.
The mouse accumulates contradictions until he forms what the text calls a fatal, stinking swamp of indecision.
And he's immune to error, but only because he pursues nothing.
This is the essence of the decadents' refusal. They declare knowledge doesn't exist, and then use that as an excuse to avoid purposeful action and responsibility.
Exactly. The decadent feeds parasitically on the cultural infrastructure built by past heroes. They enjoy the security, the laws, the systems, while simultaneously declaring everything unreliable, meaningless, and unjust.
So they avoid the hard, frightening work of finding personal truth and purpose.
They do. If the totalitarian adversary fails because of rigid certainty, the decadent adversary fails because of total cynicism.
And both paths are expressions of a deep fear of the unknown.
They are. The rigid ideologue attempts to control chaos through false knowledge and tyranny. The nihilistic decadent attempts to render chaos irrelevant by declaring all meaning dead and retreating into paralysis. Neither strategy can adapt to genuine novelty.
So if those are the two fatal traps set by the adversary, the heroic path offers the only sustainable alternative, creative renewal.
Right.
And this path doesn't promise perpetual stability. It promises the capacity for constant adaptation, which often begins with a crisis.
It almost always begins with a crisis. When circumstances change rapidly, when the anomaly becomes too big to ignore, when the protective wall collapses or the king dies, adaptation necessitates revolutionary measures.
Which requires a complete reconstitution of what the present is and what the future should be.
It does. The individual or the society must allow the old order to die and return to the unpredictable domain of chaos.
This is the heroic journey itself, the descent into the underworld.
Yeah.
It demands the disintegration of the socially determined personality. You see this in shamanic initiation or the Buddha's path to enlightenment.
You do. The shaman, mythologically, is reduced to a skeleton and has their organs removed before being reconstructed. This symbolizes the stripping away of the old, convenient self the person society told you to be, so that you can be reintegrated at a level of unique individuality based on truth.
And that requires the voluntary submission to negative emotion.
It does. Anxiety, guilt, shame. All the previously implicit flaws have to surface.
And this journey is directly mirrored in the alchemist's pursuit of the philosopher's stone, the lapis. This isn't about turning lead into gold, is it? It's a metaphorical process of psychological redemption.
That's right. The alchemist's pilgrimage is the journey to redeem matter, which means the self by uniting all the opposites, the masculine and feminine principles, the conscious and unconscious, the king and queen, all of which come from the domain of the chaos dragon.
And that means confronting, naming, and integrating every previously taboo or repressed aspect of the self. Hatred, cruelty, greed, and fear. Wait, this sounds counterintuitive and it needs clarification. How does integrating cruelty and hatred make you heroic? Doesn't that risk turning you into the adversary who is defined by these things?
That is the essential difference between integration and identification. A brilliant question.
Okay.
The adversary identifies with their hatred and acts it out. The hero integrates it. Integration means acknowledging that the capacity for that darkness exists within you. You recognize the precise psychological mechanism by which you could become tyrannical or hateful, and by knowing it, by understanding it, you gain mastery over it.
So the hero is not the nice person.
The hero is not the nice person. The hero is the integrated person, one who has faced the dark totality of their own human potential and chosen competence and truth instead.
So the goal is to be a dangerous person who has chosen to be good, rather than a harmless person who has no capacity for action when chaos strikes.
Absolutely. The true treasure is only found in the region of danger, the cavern, the abyss, the belly of the whale, because only there can you find the strength and wisdom required to transform the world.
So once the hero has returned with this integrated personality, they have to apply this new wisdom to the community. Mythologically, the sources frame this as the transition from Moses to Christ.
Yes. A shift from the rule of the law to the rule of the spirit.
And Moses symbolizes the old generation, the letter of the law, the list of explicit prohibitions and commands.
Right. And the sources note that Moses represents the boundaries that cannot ultimately redeem humanity, which is why mythologically he cannot reach the promised land. Christ, or Joshua, which is the same name, symbolizes the ability to transcend that letter of the law.
Christ often presented these moral Gordian knots to illustrate the limitation of rigid rules. The classic example is the Sabbath dilemma. Is it permissible to heal someone or gather food on the holy day?
It's a perfect example. If you strictly adhere to the list of laws, do not work on the Sabbath, you are forced into a paradox. You have to suppress the act of higher moral order, which is the alleviation of suffering or the preservation of life.
So the law, when it's applied rigidly, leads to moral failure. It's a good foundation, but it's insufficient for life's infinite complexity.
It is. So the shift is radical, moving from forced obedience to tradition to trusting in individual conscience. This is the rule of the spirit.
And what are the two essential principles of this higher heroic morality?
Well, the first principle is love God. Interpreted psychologically by the sources, this means listening to the voice of truth, or the logos, and acting accordingly.
It means prioritizing the highest, most adaptive form of truth you can conceive of, even when it conflicts with the established written rule or cultural tradition.
Which is an act of incredible courage.
And the second principle, love thy neighbor as thyself. We often simplify this to just being friendly, but the sources give it a massive, massive weight.
They do. It means attributing to the other person an equivalent value, seeing them as a representative of God, the creative spirit, and acting based on that valuation, not on mere politeness or power dynamics.
And it requires profound self-respect as a precondition, doesn't it? You can't attribute creative value to your neighbor if you despise the creative potential within yourself.
You can't. And this is the ultimate act of humility and responsibility.
And this whole movement demands what the sources call perfection. But this doesn't mean being a flawless individual.
No, not at all. It means accepting the absolute personal responsibility that's imposed by recognizing the divine, the creative potential in man.
This is metamorality, a moral structure designed to continually update the moral rules themselves.
Exactly. It recognizes that rules are temporary, necessary tools, but the underlying commitment to truth and compassionate adaptation is eternal. This acceptance of absolute personal responsibility for both the good and the terrible evil within the self is the only stable position between rigid fascism and paralyzed decadence.
So the hero is the one who accepts the terrifying freedom and responsibility of judging the rule against the spirit.
That's it in a nutshell.
So we come to the conclusion. The heroic path, while redemptive, demands the individual accept the tragic weight of self-consciousness, the knowledge of finitude and death that permanently contaminates all experience with threat.
Yes, it requires courage in the absence of certainty. It's a leap of faith into the unknown, guided only by the logos.
And here we have to reiterate that critical distinction about suffering. It is not the natural disasters, the accidents, the cancer, the floods that make life intolerable.
No, we are built to bear those tragedies honorably and to respond to them collectively. It's part of the deal of being alive.
Instead, it is the useless suffering we inflict on each other, our moral evil, the pervasive consequence of the lie that corrupts our ability to manifest faith in our central creative nature.
Our capacity for cruelty is what transforms our world into a place of existential horror. It's self-inflicted.
Furthermore, we have to abandon the idea that the destination of human existence is some static, perfect, utopian state. The philosopher Dostoevsky showed us that man would find such perfection absolutely intolerable.
Life is defined by the process, by the struggle, and the dynamic balance, not the final inert endpoint.
The sources offer that powerful analogy. The point of a symphony is not the final note. If the point of life were simply a guaranteed static destination, the struggle wouldn't be meaningful.
No, the meaning is found in the capacity to focus on the innately interesting and significant events of the present, navigating the tension between order and chaos day by day.
So this entire deep dive brings us to the final unavoidable choice. The only way to avoid the traps of fascism, which is tyranny through rigid identification, and decadence, which is decay through nihilism,
Is identification with the hero, with the connoisseur who chooses truth.
and that requires organizing your personal and social demands into a coherent, hierarchical unit, and serving the group as both a creator and an agent of necessary renewal.
It means standing perpetually on a knife's edge, honoring tradition but being willing to burn the past when it's necessary for the future.
And the greatest lever for positive change is not political revolution or grand social engineering. It's the small, daily choices between good and evil.
Solzhenitsyn's claim, "A man who stops lying can overthrow a tyranny," distills this perfectly.
That one refusal to lie.
That refusal to lie, however small the truth may seem, is the fundamental act of non-cooperation with the adversary. The lie is the abandonment of meaning for security, which guarantees eventual misery. Accepting the truth, however difficult or painful, is the act that preserves the soul and allows the capacity for good, the creative logos, to manifest.
So this entire framework, from the Ouroboros all the way to the hostile siblings, gives us a concrete hypothesis. Why don't we conduct the experiment and discover if embracing truth and responsibility can truly make life bearable and meaningful?
It's a genuine experiment, and the sources offer a provocative final thought, cited from the Gospel of Thomas. The kingdom of heaven is spread upon the earth, but men do not see it.
The terrifying possibility that suggests is that our self-deception, our cowardice, our fear, and our hatred are what pollute our experience and transform the world that could be heaven into our self-made hell.
The world is contaminated not by external threat, but by the relentless accumulation of our own moral failures. The choice between hero and adversary is eternal, and it happens right now, every time you decide what to say and what to pursue.
And that is the critical takeaway, isn't it? The eternal importance of choosing exploratory humility, the hero over rigid ideological certainty, the adversary. The choice demands courageous self-awareness.
And with that profound realization, we bring this deep dive into these complex psychological and mythological sources to a close. Thank you so much for joining us on this extraordinary exploration.
Your attention and your willingness to grapple with these difficult truths is what makes this interaction truly worthwhile. We are so grateful for you sharing this channel and this discussion with others who seek knowledge and insight.
We really are.
We invite you to subscribe, continue exploring difficult, fascinating truths together, and join us next time on The Deep Dive.